Yo, what a day. How are you, everyone? So the other link crashed. Not sure what's happening. Probably doing too many spaces in one day. How are you, man? You're alive? Nick.
Oh, okay.
Nick. Of course. Nick. All right. Well, let me see what's happening with Nick's mic. I'm trying to invite. Oh, that's you, Tammy. You got the background noise. Let me mute Tammy. Nick, can you hear me? Great. All right. So we'll see if Nick can even join, if this space is going to even be possible. I'm just inviting all the speakers. We've got an incredible panel here. But Nick, Benny, how are you?
Hey, how we doing?
Good, man. Good. Trying to get Nick's mic to work. We just kicked it off. Let me get Alex Stein in here.
Okay. Fantastic.
Are you still in East Palestine?
I am
I'm
not.
not sure, you went there, didn't you? And you were handing out. Can you tell us your experience? What were you doing in East Palestine?
Yeah, so in East Palestine, a lot of times in the media business, you go to a place and you monetize someone else's pain. While that is the news business, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Unfortunately, some of these stories are just too damn sad for a guy like me. And so we went to try and bring, of course, attention to the plight of the people in East Palestine, but then also some light. As Christians, we're called to be light unto this world. And so I wanted to the nuclear mushroom cloud inflationary cycle. I'm not sure how far. I've perhaps seen better days. The downtown is made up of a Dollar General and a McDonald's, and Donald Trump, of course, went to that McDonald's, and the rest is history. I think everyone saw. We certainly saw on our site and with Team Benny today, just the power of someone doing something kind for these people. But I'll end by saying this, and I certainly don't want to monopolize the time here. We did get up and go. My team did physically go there, and those people are not living inside of something that is trumped up or some type of hoax. I tell you the truth, I am not a sickly person. I'm married to a medical professional. I consider myself in quite good health for the age of 36. And my eyes, ears, nose, and throat were burning when I left after just a few hours. We just spent one day there. We acquired, myself and my director of photography acquired a horrible cough. People are saying they're coughing up blood. I am of the mind that I believe that we should shut the whole thing down until we figure out what the hell is going on, which is a paraphrase of a famous Trump line. And that we, I'm certainly, find myself with strange bedfellows. And I guess I'll end with this. Screaming at the top of my lungs after my experience there, where the hell is Greta Thunberg? I hope she joins this space. I'm going to tweet at her right now. Greta Thunberg, get the hell into this space. And maybe you can tell us,
Please.
Maybe you can tell us exactly why you're not inside of the largest ecological man-made disaster in American history. And if I were to ask her that right now, she would probably say, "How dare you?"
Yeah, Benny, you say everything that I want to say.
I want to, Nick. I've got a bunch of questions for both of you guys because you're both at East Palestine, not Palestine. My apologies. Just breaking for news. I brought you in to give us a quick overview of the developments today with the breaking news you were covering earlier. Gives time for more audience members to join, and then we can kick off the space. Mateus.
Yeah, that's right. We have some unfortunate news to go over out of Florida. This occurred in Pine Hills, Florida, where we learned earlier this morning that a woman was found shot to death outside of a home in that area. And then news reporters covering the scene came under fire. We know one of those news reporters has also died. The suspect then entered a home nearby, shot and killed a 9-year-old, and their mother remains in critical condition in the hospital at this time. We know that the shooter, 19-year-old, has been arrested and charged with at least one of the murders and is believed to be responsible for all 5 of those who have been shot. That's coming out of Orange County in Pine Hills, Florida.
I appreciate the update, man. Do jump back in. If there's any more developments, we'll bring you up as always. Just DM me on WhatsApp or just come in and request. Mateus, thanks a lot for coming in, getting out of a meeting to update us. All right, Nick, this is your show, man. What the fuck were you doing in the last few days? Jesus Christ. We were 1 second we were talking about.
It's been
1 second. Well, it's been a week, hasn't it?
It's been over a week now, yeah.
Jeez. 1 second, like, hey, Mario.
So.
2 weeks ago, like, Mario, there's an earthquake in Turkey. I want to go. I'm like, bro, no, the earthquake is done. There's nothing to cover. Mario, I need to go. I'm about to book my flight. I'm like, man, please don't. There's no point. And then Ohio again is like, Mario, and I go. I'm like, I think this one's a bit better than the earthquake, but I don't think you need to go. Is it really worth it? It's too dangerous. I'm already on my way. I'm like, great, of course you are. And here we are.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think it was a question. I think I said I was going. So
and then yesterday when I told you we were invited, me and Gorka were invited to Bakhmut in Ukraine by the Zelensky or someone from the Zelensky administration. The first thing you're like, Mario, I'll be very upset at you if you don't bring me. So whatever mental disorder you have, bro, it's gonna get you hurt one day. But it obviously paid off extremely well. Just want to, Benny, I'll just to give more space on the panel. I'll send you a co-host invite if you want to co-host. Just gives us more space for speakers. And Nick, this is your show, man. You and Benny's show. You've been on the ground there, covering the story. We've got a great panel for you guys. But Nick, give us an overview. I would love you and Benny to give us just a general overview of what we know, what your experience is, how the story developed, and obviously Trump's visit today. Nick.
Sure. Yeah, so the story has developed, let's say, a lot over the past 9 days, as a lot of people in this space know. It wasn't widely covered for the first, I believe, Benny, correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 11 days after this happened. Mainly because, Joe Biden was busy shooting small hobby balloons out of the air, and that ended up, taking over the news cycle. That's at least the excuse. However, this ended up being much worse than what even I had anticipated. Once I had gotten there, I'd gotten on the ground, opened up my car door, and I just got a huge, just intoxicating whiff of chemicals. And Benny, I know you had the same experience.
Intoxicating, like let me state this: intoxicating in the bad way, right? This wasn't like doing a shot of Jack Daniels. This was like more like a shot of pepper spray to the face. And I'm not saying for any of the military or first responders or any police officers that actually have to get pepper sprayed for their job. I'm not saying it's that. I'm saying it's a light pepper spray. So if you're the guy doing the pepper spraying and you get a whiff of it, that's what it's like all day, constantly.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And then you have people that are living here. You have people that are living near the crash site. The crash site, I was trying to do a piece on Newsmax, and I ended up having to cancel last second because of the instant migraine that I got, which actually induced vomiting because I got so close to the crash site at one point when they were still dumping chemicals out into the ditch. This was last week. I believe it was the second or third day that I was here. So it's gotten a little bit better since then. And by better, I mean they've washed the chemicals down into the waterways. And I actually have video of that today of somebody working for Norfolk Southern saying that that's what they were doing. So that'll be a little bit interesting, I guess. It's really sad for the people that are there. These streams run through people's backyards. They get into groundwater. There's a lot of wells. And there has not been a lot of transparency from the state government or the federal government, which is why this situation has sort of devolved the way that it has. Nobody trusts any information, anything that they're being told, because they've been lied to and misled for almost 3 weeks now, which is absurd. I mean, if you can't trust your government to tell you whether or not it's safe to drink your water, what is government for at this point? I mean, it's extremely it's an extremely volatile situation, and there's really no end in sight here. I mean, it's going to have to be covered for a while. But I'm sure we're going to get pretty deep into this. James, I believe you had something to say here. Welcome back.
Good evening, everyone. I'm calling from the UK, so it's quite late. My time, it's at 1:30, so I won't be on too long. But I've been following this story, like many people in the UK, and getting a lot of great insight from people on the ground in Ohio. And what's been really interesting about this, a couple of things. Firstly, this is a moment for individual community journalism, where people are posting what is going on in their own communities in this area affected, not just in East Palestine, but also potentially wider, because the pollution is going to be, possibly going downstream. And people are coming up with verified videos and good content. And, I've got my concerns about the spread of tech in a number of different ways, but I'm not a Luddite, and I recognize that on certain stories, there is a power to technology, and particularly community journalism. And that's been shown on this, because if the government aren't saying anything, then we need the actual residents to say something. And Twitter's been fantastic for that. We're getting to share our stories. And because Musk now has the keys of Twitter, there's a certain freedom attached to that we don't get in other social media forums. And so we've got the wind at our sails, not just on this, but a number of different issues. It could be COVID responses, could be cost of living crisis, it could be Ukraine or vaccine. But it's certainly happening with this story in Ohio. So largely, I'll just take a step back tonight and listen to all the great comments in terms of what's going on the ground and get some more insight and more learnings from this, which is one thing I really love about all the spaces that are being done here, is the forums for learning and constructive debate that pushes the arguments in a slightly more nuanced direction. But one thing I would add before I sign off on this is it's very ironic that the net zero aspect to environmentalism, which I think is actually one of the greatest virtue contracts that we're facing at the moment, because the solutions that they're providing, there's a problem, and then the solutions that they provide make more problems. And a lot of crass logic under the auspice of corporatism. And a lot of people are getting blindsided by that. But meanwhile, we've got governments around the world who are talking about aspects of climate change and telling us plebs what we can and cannot do in terms of our lifestyle, whether it's 15-minute cities, smart city, anything with smart is about surveillance, under the auspice of net zero. But meanwhile, the real important aspect of environmentalism right now is pollution. And this is a perfect example whereby the American government's state authorities are conspicuous by their silence. Isn't that ironic, considering the agenda is all about net zero, but actually on the ground pollution, and actually telling communities what is safe, what is not safe right now. It's slightly ironic considering we've had 3 years of the stay safe message, and yet communities in Iowa are not getting that message relayed by their own government. That's all I need to say.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, James. Malcolm, or wait, Benny, you unmuted there, so let's let you.
I just want to make James. I just followed you, my man. One, incredible accent. Two, incredible insight. What an important statement about community journalism. This story would not exist, along with many other stories, were it not for social media and were it not for journalists on the ground. I'm looking right now at Nick's tweet, the famous tweet of the woman in the hot pants throwing the rock into the lake or the creek bed. This mother has 15.1 million views. Now, as somebody who works in cable TV, let me tell you something. That is as many views as gets accumulated over primetime hours of all three networks. And that's a combined view count. And that's how powerful Nick being at a creek bed in Ohio is. And the difference that it makes, of course, amplified because some of those cable TV shows, some of the biggest ones like Tucker Carlson, bring Nick on and then play this video. The amplification is unlike anything we've ever seen before. And so it is actually the citizen journalist and the social media user and the people on this chat listening to this space that saved the people of East Palestine, because no one in the corporate press and no one especially anyone inside of corporate politics, wish to have this story come to light.
Are you talking about?
No,
are you talking about Courtney Miller?
Yeah, we'll get to Courtney Miller here shortly. Scott, we met earlier today, so
Okay.
Yeah, but no, we're definitely going to get to Courtney Miller. She was the one that threw the rock in the water, just to be clear. And she has been fantastic since then. She has been one of the catalysts of this story. She is what's made this as big as it is. But Benny, you're definitely right. You got here soon after I did. I believe it was probably a day and a half, something like that. It was very soon after. You were one of the first people on the ground here because, even when you got here, I don't believe there were still many cameras here at all. I know the first day that I was shocked that there was nobody here, that nobody was on the ground at the time. And so, there's a lot of thanks to you on that for sure. But, what are we missing here? Why did it take us guys on Twitter to blow this story up, to make it what it is? Why wasn't the mainstream media here? Local news, national news, nobody. What was going on in your opinion?
In my opinion, it was the corporate media kraken that is a Frankenstein monster with tentacles that wrap itself around companies like Norfolk Southern. If I may, I love telling stories, but just a very, very brief one. I lived in Washington, D.C. for 15 years. Norfolk Southern is famous for throwing one of the biggest ragers of a party in Washington, D.C., where they rent out all of Union Station. They bring in FDR's old train car. It is like a 27-room rager of a party for Republicans and Democrats. I've gone to it. This was many years ago. But I'm telling you, these people buy and sell. They're politicians. These guys might as well have a Norfolk Southern patch sewn to the back of their Joseph A. Banks suits, because these companies come in and they buy and sell these politicians. They throw these lavish parties in Washington, D.C. I've seen it with my own two eyes. Everyone wanted an invite to the Norfolk Southern party. And what they're doing is very cheaply, with cheap cocktails and cheap vodka, buying off all the staffers, buying off all the politicians. So when something like this happens, or when they are being told to make their trains safer, they have the right lobby effort to make sure that they can get around that. And they thought they could really skate here. I truly believe this. I truly believe that they thought they could skate here. They could actually nuke a town. And I say nuke, not flippantly. You've all seen the mushroom cloud. They did that. They not only nuked the town, but now, I have personally felt the effects, and so has Nick, of what they've done. And now you've all seen what they've done to the water supply. And good luck. That's all heading downriver. So that's not going to affect millions of Americans. It's up in Canada. People are complaining about rainbow snow in Canada. The only person cheering for that is Pete Buttigieg. That's just because he's, a truly craven idiot. This guy and the people who are around him, and I'll finish, I suppose, with this, because the question was, why haven't we heard about this? The reason we haven't heard about this is because people don't get any political points on it. If this happened in Detroit or if this happened in Philadelphia, this would be front page news. They'd send in the military. But this happened to a community of forgotten Americans, not the favored poor. This did not happen to an area that would give any power to the people who currently hold power. And so bringing light and attention to it just brings light and attention to their failures. And more importantly, it brings light and attention, and this is the final thing I'll say here, is it brings light and attention to the fraudulence of the green movement and the climate cultists. They are nowhere to be found. Greta Thunberg was in Davos just a few short weeks ago, staying at a 4-star hotel. Who knows? Maybe she flew there private. I'm not sure. I know a lot of people did. And and where the hell were they inside of the largest ecological man-made disaster in American history? Nowhere. Where are all those lunatics who throw soup on Monets inside of museums in London? Did your balls fall off? Oh, now that you have an actual ecological disaster, you can't be bothered to lift a finger or to even show up. So yeah, I mean, these are the reasons, because it exposes far too much.
And I want to jump in, Nick. I'm jumping in just to tell you, Addie's got 10 minutes, so maybe if you want to take it, she's been covering the story as well as an independent journalist. So if you'd like her insight as well, Nick.
I'd like his insight, for sure, just to
Sorry, Addy, my bad, bro. Yeah, sorry, Addy. Your mic is yours, man. I did a good thing by giving you the mic and messed it up.
You assumed his gender.
Sorry, bro.
You assumed his gender.
No more. Yeah, you assumed the gender. Yep. But,
I did a whole
anyway, yeah,
gender space a few weeks ago.
That was a rough one.
Go ahead,
that
Addy.
was rough to handle. So.
Okay.
But
yeah. Hey,
Addy.
checking in. Hopefully, you guys can hear me. Okay.
Yeah, bro, we can hear you fine.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I'm traveling right now. I'm on my way to Florida, and I heard somebody said. Well, anyways,
Hey, you just dropped out, man.
Yeah,
Nick, I'll give you the mic back. Maybe go to Brian or someone else.
Yeah, definitely Brian. I need Brian's response to Benny's comments. I know I saw you laughing over there, so I got to hear it.
No. So I don't want to say that this isn't a horrible disaster because it is. But when I hear things like it's the worst man-made ecological disaster in history, it's just not. It's so untrue. At least from everything we know up until this point. I mean, we could go to the Exxon Valdez, where 11,000 square miles of ocean was covered in oil with 1,300 miles of coastline. I could just list probably 20, 25 different man-made ecological disasters that were way worse than what's going on in East Palestine. I want to say that I'm not trying to say that this isn't something to be concerned about. It definitely is. It definitely shouldn't have happened. It's definitely affecting a lot of people. But I think some of us, we tend to exaggerate it a little bit when we talk about certain things like that.
How would
So
you
this is the
say
kind
it
of
was
this is the kind of thing that blows. It's kind of stuff that blows my mind, because what if this chemical, which it will, seeps down into the water basin, right? That feeds the mouths of rivers that go to millions of Americans. So I'm not saying that the Exxon Valdez was a good thing, but I'm also,
you're saying what if? Most of the studies I've seen to this point say that as it flows downriver, it becomes more diluted in the.
Let me ask you a question, Brian. Have you been to East Palestine?
No, I have.
Okay, so would you drink a gulp out of the tap water from a sink in East Palestine?
Right now, I probably would not be doing it.
Why?
No. Because I think it just happened. There's obviously some contaminants in the water. The EPA says it's safe. I would probably err on caution.
But wait, the initial investigation said it would dissipate in only 1.2 days or 1 to 2 days, right? And you've seen studies that corroborate that.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said the original studies and the original assessment said it would dissipate in 1.1 to 2 days. And so you're saying also that those studies are correct. So by your estimation and your standards, it should be safe to drink. Your estimation and your standards, it should be safe to drink, shouldn't it?
I think it probably is safe to
drink. And you don't need to make baby formula who live in this community. And you're saying that thousands of Americans or make baby formula because you don't have to live there.
That's said I wasn't trying to minimize it. What
actual response,
Benny,
you don't have to live
there. Okay, Benny, the beat. Hold on. I'll throw you a bone here, Brian. I'll throw you a bone.
Disaster in American history, as far as we can tell right now. And if you go back, you go to the Deepwater Horizon oil gusher. You go to the Exxon Valdez. You go to the nuclear weapons detonations in Nevada that harmed thousands of people in the 50s and all the way to the 80s. There's so many other things that
Brian, why does this have to be the worst worst environmental disaster in American history to actually be an issue?
It doesn't. I'm just saying, when I was responding to Benny's comments that it was. And if I could continue, I was saying I don't want to minimize this. I think it's a disaster. It definitely needs attention. Those people need help. I'm just saying, when you exaggerate and say things like that, it can undermine the entire movement in my mind.
Okay.
So I guess I guess I will correct and say that probably, given the long, because you actually don't know what the effects of these disasters are, given the long arc of history. But perhaps Brian's onto something here, that maybe the worst ecological disaster in human history is Joe Biden blowing up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Yeah, and you don't have any evidence of that either.
Well, neither did we that the Russians did it, but that was what the White House came out and said. So, I mean, here it goes.
Yeah, they blew themselves up, right? I mean, that just makes total logical sense, and now they're paying to
It's
repair it.
It's 69D Master Chess, isn't it? Right? They blew it up to spite the Germans, their biggest, one of their biggest buyers. Screw you guys for giving us money.
You walked right into that one, Brian.
I walked right into what?
No.
But making a Biden comment.
Perhaps you can answer this question for me. I've been curious about this one. You know who funded the studies? Because I have the article right in front of me about who funded the initial studies. You know who did the studies that said the water was safe?
Yeah, Norfolk. I'm sorry. The company. What's the company? Norfolk Southern.
So the train company, you are correct, sir. So the train company that's responsible for this and that decided to nuke this town also was responsible for the testing to say people go back to work, drink the water, have a sippy sip. Why are you okay with that, Brian? Why am I the one? Why am I the conservative having to come through and say, stop being such a corporate simp? These people are terrible.
I think many of us have been speaking out against corporate greed, cost cutting,
Look at the
lobbying,
politicians who spoke out against JD,
regulations.
right? You know how some politicians spoke out against JD Vance and they were like, "Oh, the water's safe. He's just, casting FUD on this whole situation. It's only safe, guys. Drink the water, because he was out there, one of the first, right? One of the first responders saying, "Hey, guys, don't drink the water. I'm giving you bottled water," right? That is the logical response, and that's what they're doing now, right? Because they realize the water is not actually clean. But before he got there, you had all these politicians, the ones who were being paid off by Norfolk Southern, saying, "Oh, the water's totally safe, guys. Don't believe this conspiracy theory, disinformation nonsense on Twitter," right? Man,
yeah,
those guys have egg on their
I
face.
applaud JD Vance. I think he did a good job.
That's good.
Well, it's also worth
really
noting
good.
that it wasn't just JD Vance. It was also when I had spoken with Senator Brown, who is a Democrat. That is the Democrat U.S. Senator from Ohio. And he was asked, if you lived here, if your family lived here, would you drink the water? Would you go near the water? His answer was, I can't answer that. And that was after he had already done the tour. That's after he had, spoken with the EPA administrator and everybody. He'd seen all the data. And that seems a little bit concerning to me. I don't know. Nobody has more data, no access to data more than they do. So, James, let's hear from you.
Yeah,
before you speak, James, just quickly, James, housekeeping, Nick, the comment section, the comment function on the space is not working. So anyone listening, you can't comment right now in the bottom right corner. So I'll just do a tweet right now and I'll pin it above so you can communicate with us. All the panelists read your questions and your feedback. So I'll just do it now. And Brian, you're going to start getting hate messages, so keep an eye out on the tweet. Go ahead, James.
Brian, there'll be no hate from me.
Yeah, we'll get Malcolm in right after that, but go ahead.
Brian, there'll be no hate from me. I'm all for different opinions, and these debates are always respectful. It's good getting everyone's insight.
Agreed.
Someone mentioned about data. One thing we've learned over the last 3 years is not follow the politicians, not follow the media, not follow the science, but we should be following the data. And it is a bit rich that the corporate involved in this is the ones in charge of the initial investigation, saying, hey, so everyone, it's fine. You cannot say that after basically 2 or 3 weeks. It will take 6 months to work out the data in terms of who's been affected from this. But what should be happening in the interim, in the hiatus period, where people are trying to unearth what is going on, is the American president. Why is he not in Ohio? Why is he not there? Why is he not saying practically nothing about this? He should be taking a lead on this to try and comfort and reassure. And part of reassurance, I seem to have forgotten this, but part of reassurance is to warn people that it might not be safe. And that is actually paradoxically what Biden has been doing over the COVID era, warning people that it might not be safe, even though a lot of those warnings over COVID were the diametric opposite. They're all bogus. This is a man, if we remember, said that regarding the vaccine, that you cannot get COVID. That was literally the greatest display, not just of misinformation, but disinformation throughout the last 3 years under public health. And here we have another public health example in a very different situation, an environmental disaster. We don't know the scale of it yet. That's pure speculation. But what we do need is the American government, state authorities, the corporate involved, to actually be completely accountable and transparent and guide the local communities, not just in Ohio, but downstream in terms of potential pollution as well into Mississippi, about what the repercussions and the ramifications could be to public health. The final thing I would say on this, someone else mentioned about why there's no one saying anything. It's not just about corporate involved, the train company. It's also who funds them. Who are the shareholders? You look at 3 of the 4 biggest shareholders, JP Morgan, BlackRock, Vanguard. Where have we heard that before? I mean, we go on about joining the dots and conspiracy theories. This isn't a conspiracy theory in the slightest. Something awful has happened, but we're not getting the transparency from the people who need to give transparency to avoid, therefore, conspiracy theories from springing up. Okay, that's all I need to say.
Boy, I would really like to chime in here.
Sure, Kristen. We'll get you in right before Malcolm. Just to be clear, Kristen is a very well known industrial hygienist. She actually gave me a lot of tips before I came here, and I definitely appreciate those. So let's hear what you have to say.
Oh, well, first off, I just want to acknowledge that here in the space, you have Scott and Tammy. We're all experts in this. And you have Rita Patriots, who is actually, I host a podcast for them, and they are going to sue the EPA. So I'd love for you to hear about that. But first, I just want to, I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm not trying to hijack the space. The things I'm hearing. So I'm an industrial hygienist. I'm just really quickly going to give you my credentials. I'm an industrial hygienist. I'm an environmental specialist. I worked in bioenvironmental engineering in the Air Force for 9 years. I do hazardous material training for the DOT. I manage hazardous materials response, transportation, and cleanups. And I'm the person that's usually on the ground doing this. I got stuck in Arizona because of the ice storm, or I'd be there right now. My colleague is there. You may have seen him. DC Drainer retweeted him. He has a red beanie on. That's Stephen Petty. He's one of me. He's been in this longer than I've been alive. This is the problem. People in my career field always scream about the lack of proper response to any hazard, whether it's the pandemic. OSHA completely abandoned all their protocols. The EPA abandoned all the protocols. You're wondering why you're not hearing this stuff. Me and my colleagues for 3 years were screaming, masks don't do jack shit. You need engineering controls. And we're right this whole time, but we were censored. But we were fighting this in court for 3 years. Now, we were the first to talk about this train derailment when it happened, but you didn't see us because, again, we're always suppressed. But let me tell you what went wrong. First of all, this rail car going through was not labeled properly. They did not alert the locals, because when you have hazardous materials that are going through a railway, the local cities, based on population, have to be informed of hazardous materials that are going through. Why? Because not every single fire department has a hazardous materials response team using very expensive equipment called a HAP site, hazardous pollutants on site. It uses GCMS, gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. So it can sample unknowns and dose it, right? So if they don't know this is coming through and they don't have the capability, most small towns like that won't have a hazmat team. They do a memorandum of agreement with a larger neighboring city, and they do drills responding. They practice this tabletop, right? So that was abandoned. Then the burn issue. There's no transparency. There's no data on why they had to do the burn. And I understand from my military training, sometimes you don't have time to do it the best and safest way, right? But everyone was screaming out about vinyl chloride. Okay, vinyl chloride is a carcinogen and it's a dioxin. But the problem is it turned into phosgene and formaldehyde. Then you have all these other chemicals ending in ENE, toluene, xylene. You have all these other chemicals. And what happened is the railroad, not the EPA, did their own testing. And you know what they used? They used VOC PID. That stands for volatile organic compounds, using a photoionization detector. And all it does is does presence, absence, in parts per million. And it doesn't tell you specific VOCs. Why is that important to you? Because it will tell you, oh, the VOC limit is, say, this number. But if you're actually breaking it down with proper air sampling over a time-weighted average, a TWA, it will show you have this, and this. You have 11 chemicals, but guess what? Those 11 chemicals all have the same target organs, and they're carcinogenic, and they're teratogenic, and mutagenic. And guess what? They are absorbed into the breast milk. So this has the risk communication. This is why I've been screaming for years that both OSHA and the EPA should be privatized. And anyone thinking that the government is going to ever tell you the truth, I worked for the federal government for 12 years, and there's a reason that I don't anymore, because they are the biggest polluters and they lie to the American people. If you didn't learn this from 9/11, when they told you that, everything was safe, and now we have people that are dealing with cancers from asbestos. Again, I don't want to take too long, but I just want to let you know that, for lack of a better term, you guys, I know my shit, and the government trained me, and I'm degreed in this. And my colleague is on the ground, and his samples are going to tell you what the EPA is not telling you, and that is when the data is really going to be revealed. But this is what I want to say about the water. Everyone, like Ben, you just said, like, would someone drink the water? Do you guys realize it's not going to get better? Like, this is going to leach into the aquifers. It's going to leach into the groundwater. And some of our aquifers spread statewide, from state to state. So it's not going to get better. And that's what the media is not telling these people. I can see this being a Superfund site. And that's what's really concerning. So I want to pass it on if you want Tammy to chime in. Like I said, we've been fighting these agencies for years.
Wow. Can I ask a follow-up question on that? I just learned more in 90 seconds than I've heard anyone on television talking about this. Any expert. That was unbelievable. What you ended with there, you ended with a word of what this could turn into if this actually seeped down into the water table. Can you please illuminate for me and maybe unpackage that? Like, what could actually happen? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so what the EPA does is they establish Superfund sites, or they're also called like brown sites.
Superfund sites?
Superfund, like FUND.
Superfund. Okay, thank you.
Yes, and this is something that was developed in the 80s. It's called CERCLA. It's the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. It's when there is such a ginormous environmental impact. It's not just for the ecosystem, but for human health. They basically just have to abandon the entire site. And so many funds are either allocated by the government or for the guilty party. In this sense, it would be, I think, multiple entities would have to pay for the cleanup. But oftentimes a Superfund site cannot ever be lived on again. And it takes decades. And the thing is that I keep trying to tell people that this sampling is not one and done. So when people said this, like, I understand, like, I have to convey very technical information to non-technical personnel. But when they said evacuate and come back 2 days later, I could not believe it. That is a crime within itself, because there was no data to prove it was safe. And when you are dealing with these types of contaminants, these carcinogens, these dioxins are so deadly. You have to treat it as IDLH. That means immediately dangerous to life and health. And everyone that was there should have been in full SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, like the fire department. And did you hear the EPA official say, I believe this was on CNN, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, said, he will send his people when it's safe to go in. I'm a military veteran, and that's about as dumb as saying, well, I'll deploy when there's no gunfire. You know what you sign up for. You have the PPE, you have all the engineering controls. This is so criminal. It's like, I just keep chewing my fist at how the OSHA and the EPA completely allow themselves to be captured and not do what they're actually designed to do. Like, these very agencies that are designed to protect people and the environment are absolutely screwing us over. And that's why I offered myself as an expert witness in litigation, and some of my colleagues in doing affidavits. And I've been doing the media rounds because I can't get to Ohio right now. So, yeah.
Can you, final follow-up, Superfund site, can you give me an example of one of those in America today?
Superfund sites. Oh gosh, off the top of my head, I don't know. I have a whole binder of the Superfund sites. Like I said, they first started in the 80s from a giant chemical spill, and they get put on. Yeah, they get put on a national priorities list. I don't know off the top of my head, but and then people get nominated for these sites. So they're proposed sites, and they turn into Superfund sites. But if I can get on my laptop, I can look, because I have a whole folder on this, because I had to do a case study on this.
would this be like nuclear range testing? I mean, this is like places with radiation.
Yeah, like Fukushima and things like that would be a super fun site, but that's not here. So yeah.
Got it. Well, forgive me if everyone else knew about this. I just find this I found it particularly illuminating. And so you believe that no one should be let back in the town right now?
Absolutely, nobody should be there. And when I saw the Tucker Carlson interview of the gentleman who was coughing up blood, that's because these contaminants are highly corrosive. And this is why I told people to, if they're still there, which they shouldn't be, and I understand that's hard to say when people can't afford to just abandon their jobs in their homes, but that's another issue. Their property values are crap now, but that burns probably his lungs. But what people can do is they can take, if they still have their HVAC filters that were in their home, they can either take out the filter and bag it or cut out certain corners of it. Like think about 5, like up, down, left, right, middle, cut those out and put them in a baggie and wash your hands very good and save those. But this is the thing I also want to say. When save them and date them. But these are for your own personal exposure. If you're average lay people that are conducting your own soil and water sampling, if chain of custody is not followed, they cannot be used in any sort of tort or injury claims. This is why you need independent contractors. And that's why my colleague, follow him, everyone, his Twitter handle is at Petty, Petty, at Petty Podcast. He's a chemical engineer. He's an industrial hygienist like I am and a certified safety professional. He owns his own environmental group. So he's down there right now doing all the sampling, just shaking his head because they didn't do the correct sampling. And that is mind blowing because you think like the EPA and what they would require would make for following the protocol of that proper sampling, and they didn't. And right now people need to be focused on the ground, the water, the soil, and all the surfaces. So surface sampling needs to be done. And you have to test until it's gone and you're back to what's called the background level. Because we have naturally occurring contaminants like this. They're called toxicants. Toxins and toxicants are two different things. So we have natural bad stuff in our soil, but it's at a negligible limit. So we have to know the background and bump it up against that. And you sample till it's gone. That's why they need to remediate the soil and they have to come in with backfill. This is a very decades-long cleanup that nobody is talking about.
So
can I piggyback off that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I just want to add to what Kristen said. I mean, I'm not going to repeat all the science because we're both credentialed and cross-credentialed in the same fields. And Kristen did an excellent job explaining the science. But there are a couple of other things I want to touch on here that really people need to understand. Number one is that I noted what J.D. Vance said when he came in and he wrote his report, and he and Marco Rubio, created this report about under-regulation of our regulatory agencies. And I just want to point out, because Kristen and I and our colleagues like Stephen Petty, who is there on the ground doing the testing, doing proper testing right now, we live in the world of regulatory agencies. We work with the EPA, we work with OSHA, we work with the DOT. We are very well versed with the regulations of all these different agencies, and we go to court and we have to deal with them in court cases and things like that. So when we stand up and we decided to blow the whistle in 2020, it was because we are government trained, DOT, EPA, and OSHA regulatory trained experts. And this is our background, this is our field. So there's nobody like a government trained professional to stand up and say, whoa, what are we doing? The government and all of these agencies right now are so guilty of revisionism. It's mind blowing. And so I argued with J.D. Vance. I mean, I appreciate him and I appreciate what he did. But one thing that I did disagree with him on as being a regulatory expert is that we are not under-regulated. And the problem is that we are not, and these regulatory agencies are not following their own standards and regulations. They are so guilty of revisionism. They are violating their own regulations right now. And we started seeing 3 years ago when OSHA started telling everybody, just wear a mask as a one-size-fits-all approach to protect against an aerosolized virus. That's when I stood up and blew the whistle and went, what in the hell is going on here? This violates their own PPE and respiratory protection standards. And now we're watching it. The same thing is happening with the EPA. They're violating their own testing standards, their own protocols. They told the whole town it was safe to go back into ground zero when they wouldn't even send their own experts in to do testing because it was not safe. So we need to understand we are not under-regulated. We are so
Yeah,
overregulated in this country. It's ridiculous. We're just not following the regulations, and these agencies have abandoned their own protocols, doing exactly the opposite, which is revisionism.
So, Dr. Kashwan, I want to get you in here real quick to tell us a little bit, because you work in environmental and climate justice and governance. So, I want your feedback on what you've heard so far. And then I'll ask you some. I'll definitely have some questions for you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, this is a good sort of segue from the last speaker talking about overregulation. I think it's helpful to sort of look into the history a little bit. In 2012, in Paulsboro, New Jersey, there was another train accident exactly like this one, which also released a toxic plume of vinyl chloride, the main sort of toxic material in this particular accident. And after the 2012 disaster, in 2015, the US Department of Transportation made it a requirement for trains carrying these kinds of hazardous flammable materials to use electronic brakes. But in 2018, the Department of Transportation removed these requirements, and there's a whole documentation of why that reversal happened and who pushed the department, and it was 2018. So these requirements were actually removed from the statute in 2018. And one of the things that the 2015 regulations would have done is to actually require these trains to declare these materials. And once they do it, they would have been labeled as highly hazardous flammable trains, as was talked about by one of the earlier speakers. So I think we really need to look at facts in terms of the types and the level of regulations and how specific types of regulations are related to the accident that just happened. So this sort of goes to the other point that was made by Brian about the history of environmental disasters in the US. And there are right now, as people were talking about, I just quickly looked up, Googled Superfund sites, and there are 1,329 Superfund sites as of August 2022. And there are some very large Superfund sites, but also there are these industrial complexes such as the Cancer Alley in Louisiana, where communities live with these kinds of conditions day in and day out. And the reason I was relating it to what Brian said was because wherever these disasters happen, we can't be selective about which disasters we care about. We always have to raise our voices to make more stringent regulations, especially when it comes to the transportation of hazardous materials. And the railroad companies are really an important player in this. And some of you may actually know about the phenomenon called precision railroading. And there's been a lot of discussion again about that. And the 2015 regulations would have also actually put a little bit of stronger regulations on the monstrous trains that carry these kinds of materials, which would have been slightly more difficult. So we have to hold all of the powerful players accountable. We also have to think about all of this long history, and we have to immediately start mobilizing for access to safe living environment and safe hazardous-free living conditions for all of the people, not just in the US, but throughout the world. So I don't think calling for...
Let me ask you...
This last one thing. Anyone saying that this is because we are overregulated and because EPA should be privatized, they really don't have expertise in the field of policy making and policy regulatory apparatuses. That's all I want to say.
Actually, I do have experience in that as a former employee of the federal government for 12 years. And I just want to point something out, and I'm definitely not trying to be rude because I hear your passion, but I blew the whistle on the entire government.
No, it's not passion. No, I'm sorry. No, it's nothing to do with passion. These are facts.
No, but can I just finish because I'm trying to respect you because it's okay to disagree.
Kristen, go ahead. Yep.
It's okay to disagree. I just want to say this. I understand, yes, the passion from all the
No,
environmental.
I wouldn't use the word passion.
Okay,
I didn't say anything about your.
Okay.
Okay, how
but
about we let her finish first? Go ahead,
I didn't mean that as a derogatory term. So can I just finish? Thanks. What I'm trying to say is, just like gun laws, you can make as many laws and rules and funds as you want. When the government is the biggest polluter and they have fascist relationships with large corporations, what is the point of having environmental regulations and laws and policies when they just give passes to their best friends? I know this for a fact. Again, I worked this environmental job for the federal government for 12 years and blew the whistle on the government being the largest polluter in this country. So I get what you're saying. And when I say passion, I'm not saying that in a derogatory way.
Because you left him out here when I told you not to do that anymore. Ava Marie, you don't leave him out here. Look what he did. He cannot be left out here ever again. Ever. I don't care what's going on.
Hold on, Nick. You can mute the speakers, by the way, man. just wondering if you remember that. I know you've been out of the game for a while.
This time, so.
I was just so just Patriots. You just you unmuted your mic as you went off on your kids. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Hey,
what was that?
Just
that was actually me and Brian talking to each other. We didn't know that we had. Damn.
So just to add what what Kristen had said, though, one of the things that you have to realize is that government, as well as those who are closest to the crown, otherwise known as government, will always find a way around it. So Norfolk Southern was one of the biggest lobbyists against that electronic railroad braking system change, mainly because there was a lot of money. And if you know anything about the railroads and you know anything about the rail companies, they're like the biggest cartels in the United States. It's like the robber barons times like 5. So the main issue that I have when people bring up that braking system is that what caused the derailment is more akin to, the forcing of PSR, which, the good doctor, he definitely brought up. And that was because it was an axle that actually snapped on the train that caused it. So even if there were electronic brakes there, again, once that axle kind of breaks and the thing goes it kind of goes runaway and the balance gets shifted, you're not going to stop it from, getting derailed there. But another issue that we also have is that this train that was derailed was classified as a mixed materials freight. So it wasn't even able to be classified as hazardous material. Therefore, it wouldn't have even been subject to regulations had they been in play. So one of the biggest proponents of removing that regulation, again, was Norfolk Southern, who also did the whole, we investigated ourselves and found no wrongdoing. Now, that's just kind of the issue is that, again, we can push as many regulations as we want, but regulations only hurt those who don't have lawyers or an army of lawyers good enough to pretty much litigate themselves out of it. Now, another thing I want to say that's also getting lost is that you have not only just the vinyl chloride that got spilled in, but you had a lot of things like the butyl acrylate, which I know it's pretty benign in and of itself in small quantities, but when you have larger amounts of that being basically leaked into the environment, it still can have deleterious effects. And also you had petroleum lube oil, massive tankers of that, leaked into the ground, into the environment, into the water basins. And then to compound this pretty much, this cluster, vinyl chloride that was basically released, they burned it. And it could have been handled much like the Paulsboro, New Jersey spill, where they actually just pumped and suctioned the vapors. But again, Norfolk Southern, who has been given undue amounts of leniency by the EPA and the local governments, thank you, DeWine, who's also, I know he's gubernatorial, but still, they've been giving undue amounts of latitude until it became too loud to basically conduct their own investigation, handle it on their own, and they burned this stuff, which is over 5 times as much vinyl chloride as what was spilled in Paulsboro. And you can ask residents over there how much economic damage and how much health damage was basically done by that, vaporized vinyl chloride spill, but they allowed them to burn it. and then, basically come in and put out all of this false data, which muddies the water. So again, regulate as much as you want, but it's like was said by Benny, corporate lobbyists and these companies and their private interests will always find a way around it. So again, please, it's such a non sequitur when you bring up the railroad breaks and that situation. You were doing much better when you talked about precision scheduled railroading, because that is the crux of the issue.
Yeah, and you're right. Can I add to that?
Please.
Okay, so there's a couple things I want to build on that, and you're exactly right, Malcolm. I also want to add to the fact that, number one, I've been involved in policy making for years as an accidental activist. I've gotten involved in many legislative bodies. I've testified in many legislative bodies around the country with Kristen. We have helped to pass good legislation. We have helped to write good legislation. We're here in Arizona right now working with the Arizona State Legislature on some key bills. So we are very directly involved in policymaking as a result of what we have seen as a major failure on the part of our government. And the other thing, Malcolm, just from our perspective as environmental professionals, we don't know, we don't have the data. We are waiting for it, but we don't have the data yet on whether or not they had to do an uncontrolled controlled burn. I know that sounds contradictory, but with a controlled burn, they usually move the chemical or the storage tank, the process bin, the vessel to a particular area where they have trenches dug and they've got water and things like that, where they can do a controlled burn and capture that ventilation. But in an emergency situation like this, we don't know what the pressure inside those tanks were. We don't know what the temperature was. So we don't know if it was going to explode. And if it was going to explode, it would have created a much worse hazard for the citizens because it would have exploded in an outward direction with shrapnel in the breathing zone, and it would have killed thousands of people. So we really don't know because we haven't seen the data yet, whether or not they had to do kind of an emergency controlled burn, which is, it's still uncontrolled, but they were able to force the plumes and the smoke upward instead of outward. So there's a lot to that, and we don't know that, but there's a lot to what's been said here by I don't remember who it was who was speaking before you, but you don't have to be involved in policymaking to understand regulations. But the fact that we are involved in policymaking and we're calling out the government for violating their own regulations that are in place is not a moot point. That's legit, and that's exactly what's happening. And that's why we've stood up and we have become accidental activists speaking out on this to expose the government for their failures because of their fascist relationships with big corporations and unions, with big tech and all of that.
Hey, Nick, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure. Let's do this.
I was just curious. Yeah, so what do the people on the ground, the residents of East Palestine, how do they feel about the burn? Do they feel like it shouldn't have taken place, or do they understand that there was possibly a greater danger?
Okay, well, they're pretty much on the same page that a lot of people are. Let me ask you, Brian, do you think that if this happened in the middle of Washington, D.C., that they would have handled it in the same way?
I don't know. I mean, what if, like Tammy said, it could have exploded and put blocks and blocks of homes in the explosion path? I don't know. I think that's a good question. I don't know if they would.
Yeah. And so the biggest concern that they have here is that they're not getting answers from their government. They don't have any of the data. They don't have. We don't even really know who gave the order at this point, which is just absolutely absurd. And so of course the people don't think that it was because you've got a bunch of finger pointing going on, and when you have finger pointing, somebody obviously there's some guilt somewhere. So yeah, I mean, people are definitely questioning whether or not this was the right idea.
Hey, really, really quick, Nick, I want to tell you, since you're on the ground there, what you need to do, I don't know if you can just walk up and ask for FOIA, but all that data is from the incident commander, and they have to, within a certain amount of days, do an after action report after doing that burn. So ask for the incident commander and get the after action report.
If you could DM me, that'd be awesome. I'll do it in the morning.
Hey guys, we're sitting here our DMs kind of melting down, and I'm going to try and get to as many people as possible, and certainly try and bring in expert opinion. And thank you for the 400,000 people that just informed me that I'm an idiot for not knowing what a Superfund site is. Now I know, and thank you. There are quite a few of them. Something that Malcolm just pivoted on that I thought was very important was fascism. And what the definition of fascism is when the government fuses with private corporations and then they oppress the people. And so I hope that at least the vast majority of people listening right now are not against fascism, not members of Antifa, but like actually literally against fascism. And that's what you sort of see here. That is sort of the banality of evil here, because no one's holding anyone else accountable. And I think that's why it's very important to have independent thinkers and independent testers. We have someone on the call right now, Scott C. Smith, on the space right now, who said he's been doing water tests inside of East Palestine. I think it'd be a good time to perhaps let him speak and maybe tell us his findings.
Yeah, I am sitting, writing up the chain of custody and everything right now. Some brief background. I was in the USA Today, and my whole life was wiped out in oil-contaminated floodwaters, and the history is on my Twitter feed. Going to press conferences with Chuck Schumer. That's when I realized that these single-use booms, plastics don't work. And in my own, disaster, I became obsessed, and I developed technology to better test the water. A fish doesn't swim in the water for a split second. A human doesn't bathe. And all our water testing standards are flawed because they assume that water's in a steady state or equilibrium. It never is. So when they take these grab samples, they're easy to game. I can go to any place in a creek or surface water, find a clear spot, take a grab sample. All that grab sample tells you is what is in that jar in that 250 or 500 milliliters. And I've been in over 60 disasters. Well, I help communities, and I identify what is in the water. For example, there is no safe limit of benzene, and many of these other things. I have spent myself to help communities over $500,000 with ALS labs in the last 7 years. And I have all this documented. I have all this reference data. So Courtney Miller reached out to me. I was there today. The railroad has started to defame her. I reshot the video on my iPhone in 4K, and I'm going to post it, and it's the same thing. The sheen came up just like the other day. So I'm going to tweet right at the railroad. Now this is about to get even better. So I wore a respirator today because when I first got there, just after a few minutes, you can definitely feel it. I wore a respirator. I have communicated with Eurofins and ALS laboratories and tested for dioxins in the soil. I use grab samples too, not just time-weighted average exposure. So we tested for dioxins, tested the soil, and I'm testing for the full gamut of chemicals with all these methods. And I have a simple saying that I educate the residents on: you can't find what you don't look for. I know how it's gamed. And going back to this, I had British Petroleum and the American Petroleum Institute endorse the technology and everything I developed from my own disaster. What most of the public doesn't understand is the undue influence of all these responsible parties. I've had contractors, I've been attacked. Scott, we don't want to use your technology. We make all our revenue, we'll lose 80% of our revenue. We own the landfills. We don't want to get the oil out of the water quickly, let alone test it properly. So the PR, what the playbook has not changed. And there's something I sense about, Twitter Spaces and this group of people coming together. This is about ready to reach a fever pitch, and I'm very confident that we're going to blow the doors wide open. So I start
Scott,
to do the testing.
let me ask you real quick, because because that's what I'm going to go over, because we actually met today. We met at Courtney Miller's house, and that was awesome. We had a pretty long discussion, pretty informative. Go ahead.
Yeah, but here's what you don't know. After you left, we have it all on video footage. I went down there, and then about 8 people came out of the woods, and this woman that apparently is in charge wanted to get the samples, said, "Who are you?" So when I asked them, "Have you tested the creek or anything?" We can't discuss. We can't tell you. You have to go to the incident information manager. So you know, the information officer. So she came on Courtney Miller's property. I said, "Here, I'm private. I'm not gonna tell you who I am. You gotta go. You answer my questions." She says, "No, I can't answer your questions, but I need to know who you are. What are you doing here?" And I said, "No, you're trespassing on private property. This is all on video. I'm editing it right now. You can see me doing the testing. Everything is documented properly. And to my knowledge, no one has tested for dioxins in the creek, let alone the full gamut of chemicals. So this is all new information. I hope to post this. I think it's going to be rather significant."
Yeah, and so Scott, you think that they are hiding this from the public?
Yeah, it's the typical playbook. You cannot underestimate the undue influence. They have PR people running the whole show. They have a very sophisticated network, and the bottom line is the politicians are, you know, call it paid off, call it corrupt, call it what you want. You can see it happening. Nothing has changed in over these, but this one is a little different because of the coverage, because of the people on Twitter. The public is going to be educated on how flawed the whole you know, environmental, you know, spill chemical industry works. And is it HEPACO? I mean, they are unbelievable, and they come out and try to intimidate you, but we just would not back down.
So real quick, Scott, I just want to say really quick, and I'll mute. Scott, I'm so glad we found each other on Twitter. I just want to say anybody who is doing sampling, and you're getting close to the contaminant, just so everyone knows, have a full face respirator, and if you can't, half face. But the cartridges that you need are, I'll say it slowly, OV for organic vapor,
yeah,
AG, acid gas, and P100. So you need a combo filter of OV, AG, P100.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I may, I don't know. I don't know if I had a respirator on today. The best one, the most expensive one I could buy at
Hey,
Home Depot.
just DM me what you have. I'll help you out. And if I have to donate for you to buy one, I will. I just want you to be protected, okay? Because this is what I do is select proper PPE.
Yeah, and I'm, yeah, that's good. I appreciate that. And I am not, I'd love to meet your guy. I'm not, you know, I think this would hold up legally, but that's not what I do. I educate, and my goal is to find out what is in the water, educate people, and expose the gaming of the system. And we also have tests. We have 12. We went out, and Courtney did it with another volunteer, and I'm writing up the chain of custody and sending it off to ALS right now. They duplicated all the 12 different locations from where is it HEPACO? I think that's the contractor on site. We duplicated all that, and we're going to cross-reference. They're not releasing the information. It is all game. So they are hysterical right now because I got right back in their faces today.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Scott,
one last
get back
thing.
to you here and just okay, go ahead.
One last thing, you guys. One of the most largest consulting companies, I don't know if you guys heard, CTEH, they were headed there on their private plane to do sampling, and the plane went down and they all died.
Really?
What?
Yes,
when?
somebody Google DuckDuckGo it. Of course the stupid comments are broken, but one of the largest contractors for this type of sampling, CTEH, they were flying, I forgot from where, and their plane crashed.
Little Rock, Arkansas.
Everybody on board died. All
Today?
5 of these environmental people. Yes, today.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So the comment section is going to be up here at the top. I pinned the post just now. Go hit there, and if you can post it in there, then I can pin it to the top.
Yeah,
so.
Christian. They find me.
Here, I'm putting some in the top of the space right now, Mario. So give it a look.
Term sort of regulatory debate that we were having. We should be, you know, thinking through this very carefully. one thing text in which we are talking about and look at comparative cases. So if you look at Europe, for example, they're also reliant on fossil fuel, gas, these kinds of trains and pipelines are everywhere, all throughout the Europe. But if you compare the number of spills and breakage, disasters, there was a map. I'm going to put the tweet back up on. Somebody pulled a map of all of the these kinds of hazardous chemical related accidents, and the whole map, the entire country is dotted with these kinds of accidents. Only when something this big happens, we hear about these accidents. But otherwise, there are hundreds of accidents literally every month here in the US. But there are not that many accidents in Europe. And so that's how we need to think about what is it that comparable industrially advanced countries are doing so that they don't face the same kind of disaster situations that we are faced with here. And so that will tell us that the balance of power between corporations and government ought to be swung in one way or the other. Anyone who says that the corporations and government are hand in hand, I agreed. I mean, political scientists, a few years back, political scientists conducted a study, and they suggested that US has pretty much become an oligarchic politics. And so corporate influence is very heavy. The lobbying goes on day in and day out. But that doesn't mean that throwing out regulations is going to solve that problem. The solution to that problem is to get rid of corporate lobbying and to hold the government to account for their actions and for their failures to regulate properly. And so that's all I wanted to say. I think the fact that we have these kinds of disasters years, and there are these thousands of Superfund sites, and there are thousands of other places that are subjected to these kinds of contaminants on a routine, regular basis, tells us something about how we think as a society about human health and human well-being. And we ought to rethink at such a large scale. This is not this place or that place. We ought to be thinking really big in that sense. Thank you.
On a basic human level, you have to consider the parents of East Palestine. I met many children when I was there, when I was standing on people's doorsteps. How are they going to raise their kids? And more importantly, what does their lives look like if they're coughing up blood and they're healthy 30-year-olds? What's going to happen to those little children? One of the scientists was talking about breast milk and how that may become toxic or poisoned with enough exposure. I mean, imagine how they sleep. Or now I'll call it fascism because definitionally it's fascism. You can call it crony corporatism all you want, but what you're seeing here, and the final thing I'll say before I'd like to invite Tom Fitton to talk about the legality of breaking news tonight of what's going on and what how these people may possibly be looking at the largest class action lawsuit against the government in American history. The final thing I suppose I would say here is who's there to help? Right? Like, shouldn't the corporations, if the corporations do something bad, shouldn't it be the EPA and the government who is holding them into account? And if the EPA and the government and the corporations are on the same side, and that side is evil, then how helpless truly are you? And this is this is our nightmare. This is things that nightmares are made of. And these people are living through a real life, slow motion nightmare. You have to think of them, and you have to think of them first. So Tom, I'd like to ask you potentially about what, you've sued the government. That's literally your career. I'd like to ask you what your take is on this.
Well, once again, I ain't no lawyer, but obviously there's going to be litigation over this, and the amount of money that will be thrown at this town, whether it's wasteful or not, is a debatable point. But there's going to be plenty of compensation, I suspect, either government or private, for the people of that community. And, I think the danger here is the politicization of this accident, in the sense that I think we're already hearing it today, that, somehow businesses should lose their First Amendment rights to petition the government on matters of regulation. This is the reaction of the Biden administration, which is to use this as a leverage point to advance more regulation that will increase expenses, make it harder, put more pressure on the supply chain. And it really has nothing to do with the accident or what happened in East Palestine. So this is not a. I think that the town, despite the tragedy, is going to do okay financially because of all the public and political attention. The question is what's going to happen regulatorily, and is the left going to use this as a way to further curtail the ability to transport goods across the country, which is something they don't want really to happen. And if they do, they want it to happen at great cost and to the benefit of their special interests, which is typically the union community.
So
and
are
the
you
environmentalists.
I just curious, are you arguing that we shouldn't try and put some limitations on lobbyists and how they interact with government and how these corporations pay off these lobbyists in order to get what they want? Or is that, did I hear that correct?
I don't know what you're saying. You're not making any sense.
It sounded like you're in support of lobbyists and the ability.
I'm in support of the First Amendment, and that's what lobbying is about.
Is that really the First Amendment?
I'm asking you what.
Lobbyists to speak for you isn't. Really...
I'm asking you what is it American citizens shouldn't be able to ask their government about? Just tell me.
Speak out. I think that the money in politics is getting out of hand, and
I think it's the money in government. I think it's the money in government that's out of hand, and the money in government is what's at issue here.
Is it right that
government deregulation is made?
Wait a minute. Can we get Tom? Let Tom finish this point, and then Brian, I'll give you stage. Tom. Okay, Brian. I guess it's you.
I was just saying, like, isn't there a point where a Google or a Twitter or a Facebook or a Norfolk Southern, they maybe should be capped at how much money they can throw at lobbyists in order to influence politicians? I understand the First Amendment argument, but I don't think money should be part of the First Amendment. I think that these companies have more than enough resources to speak out against regulations themselves rather than paying lobbyists to basically push politicians in a certain direction. That's all my point is.
Aren't you talking about like Citizens United, which exists already, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm against Citizens United, so that's where I stand.
Well, the First Amendment doesn't allow you to do that. I guess you could try to engage in authoritarian and totalitarian regulation of speech, but that's un-American, frankly.
Yeah, but I'm not arguing that these
guys. I don't want to go down some philosophical rabbit trail.
Well, it isn't philosophical. What we're hearing today is that too much power the railroads have, and we got to stop the lobbyists and all this anti-First Amendment activity or rhetoric. And don't think it's tied to all the other attacks on the First Amendment. The left doesn't want private entities to be able to speak and get in the way of whatever agenda they have through state action. We're seeing that with the railroads now. We just had thousands of people were just told we should ban lobbyists. I mean, my gosh.
So, I mean, the way that I would look at this is the First Amendment is the right for people that you deeply disagree with to be able to speak freely. So, regardless of who, the actual power of free speech is that people are able to speak freely, and especially the ones that you disagree with, right? And so that's why we're all thankful for Elon Musk and these Twitter. This is why thousands of people are listening to this on Twitter, is because they assume that they'll hear honest opinions in this space, albeit divergent opinions, and people who disagree with each other.
And Benny, one of the things, and to kind of speak to the issues, the concerns about lobbyists, which I understand why folks are concerned, but let me suggest the problem, the issue of lobbyists as it's being described, it's a creature of government regulation. So when the government says, I can make or break you with a comma in the tax code or a regulation, you can bet a corporation is going to spend a lot of money trying to influence that regulation or where that comma goes. So if you don't like lobbyists as it's being described here, then you want to have the government be involved in less regulation and less control of the private sector, because when you have increased government control and involvement in the private sector, lobbyists make a killing.
I think that everyone can see. I mean, I think that virtually anyone who's clear-eyed and is looking at the situation honestly can see that the major bad guys is the fusion of huge, big, out-of-control government with huge, big, out-of-control corporations, and they have the same agenda, and that agenda is, at least at this point, to harm these people by not telling them the truth, and to fund their own studies to try and get this community, shove this community as far as they can out of the public attention. And it's spaces like this and reporters on the ground that have changed everything. Bricksuit is someone who has been asking and waiting politely for the better part of an hour because he says that he really has something to add to this conversation. Bricksuit is great. He is exactly what you think he is. He wears a brick suit. There he is in the photo. So please, Bricksuit, have at it.
Hey, no pressure there. Thank you very much for the intro there, Benny. Look, I saw the title there about the possibility of this being a cover-up. First of all, I want to say the situation in East Palestine is absolutely horrible. It's terrible. They deserve all the tracking, the independent lab results. They deserve tracking studies longitudinally to make sure that there are no effects lingering on as we go forward in time. That being said, I just want everybody to realize that these type of accidents with rail transportation of bulk chemicals are comparatively rare in the United States based upon the number of track miles which we have, which is about 170,000 miles of track, and we ship about 1.8 trillion freight tons per year. So it's not like Japan that only has 24,000 miles of track, or which has fewer miles.
We lost
you. Did we
you.
lose Brick, or is it me? Okay.
Nope, we lost you.
Damn, I had a question for him.
Brick is hitting the bricks.
Ah. Boo.
Okay, so
right,
Bricksuit, sorry, buddy, no one can hear you.
All right. Well, anyway, let me move past this a little bit. Let's get Alex up here. You've been closely tracking the story as well. I've been, seeing a lot of your tweets retweeted by like everybody on my timeline here recently. Just question here for you. Do you believe that we're looking at something where, if this wasn't blown up on Twitter or something like that, that you wouldn't have any sort of government response? What took the EPA until I believe was yesterday to actually compel Norfolk Southern to clean up this disaster site?
Yeah, for sure. I don't think that anyone would be talking about it if it weren't for social media. So the first person I credit myself with, actually bringing attention to it is actually Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She DM'd me about it and said, like, nobody is talking about this. And, that included Fox News, like everyone on corporate media. And from that day, I actually produced Benny's podcast. Like literally the next day, we led with that story, and we were like all talking about, no one's talking about this major story. Why is this the case? And we were all shocked that it had happened. And then I believe it was 3 days later where Pete Buttigieg's name was trending on Twitter, which led to him finally tweeting about it because he was trending. And his statement was something to the effect of, "Oh, I continue to be concerned about the situation going on in East Palestine." And then, like, as if he had given a previous statement, we had looked, all on the DOT's website and everything, and through his tweets, through like the DOT's tweets, nothing. So that was his first response. And then he went on to go on TV literally, like, I think it was the next day, talking about how common these things are. Number one, like, complete derailments aren't as common. I think Bricksuit was touching on this before he lost connection. There is a lot of rail in this country, and like when you see the number 1,000, it looks like a lot. A lot of those are not major derailments like this. And then number two, he missed the entire point that it was a chemical explosion and controlled explosion. That doesn't happen often. That doesn't happen on all of these 1,000. So he's saying, oh, everybody is talking about this one case, but there are 1,000. So it showed that he completely missed the point of, why people
That's on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. He was trying to minimize it after he was called out. And then yesterday he goes on TV, oh, I'll visit when the time is right. Yeah, the time is right is after Trump comes, brings media attention there, and the Biden administration looks, like they're leading from behind as always. And now the time is right is tomorrow, apparently. So yeah, I think nobody was paying attention, and because a lot of people brought this point up is because it's basically not Joe Biden's voters. So they're not going to contribute to his reelection. Like they're not, they don't like Biden anyway. So his thoughts are, why am I going to care what they think? They hate me anyway. So he thought they'd be able to ignore it and nobody would notice at all. So
all right, so let's get Brian's feedback on that. What's going on here? Why is Joe Biden ignoring this? Why is he not going? Why isn't he talking about it? Because you have also you've told us that you wouldn't even trust the drinking water there, essentially, at this point, based on everything we know. So why is Joe Biden ignoring the situation?
Yeah, so I think that you say ignoring it, and I think what you mean is making public statements about it, because the administration has been on the ground since hours after the crash happened. The EPA went in, they started testing. The NTSB went in and they started doing an investigation, which is pretty much now working with Mayor Pete, the transportation secretary. I think that some criticism is deserved in regards to public statements not being made immediately by Biden or Buttigieg.
Yeah. It seems like he's more interested in what's happening in Ukraine, which is a continent away, in a war that has nothing to do with America, than he is with East Palestine.
I think he is. So let me just finish, and then you can reply. But I think that the Ukraine situation has a part to do with it. It was the 1-year anniversary, and he wanted to go over there and show support. I support his actions there. But getting back to Ohio, like I said, I think some criticism is warranted in that they should have probably made a statement a little bit sooner, but I don't see that as a serious issue in regards to their actual actions. The EPA was there, the NTSB was there, the CDC was there, the Health and Human Services was there, and they were all doing tests. They were monitoring things, monitoring people's health, and investigating the crash. Now, like Mayor Pete, I don't really think after the crash and weeks after the crash, when people start worrying about the pollution and all that, I don't really think he has a role in it, or it's not urgent. The CDC should be there, HHS should be there, and the EPA should be there, which they were.
But how come we never really heard anything from it? Aaron, yeah, I'll bring you in here.
Can I jump in here? Yeah,
absolutely.
So here's what leadership looks like when there is an accident. And, I'll speak as a physician. When there are medical mistakes, mistakes happen, and sometimes patients are harmed. What you do is, first of all, you don't ignore the mistake and you don't ignore the harm. You acknowledge it. You apologize for it. If you or others were at fault. And you also state very clearly to the patient, the patient's family, here's what we're going to do to rectify the situation. So it's not about just making statements, and it's not about just sending in, bureaucrats behind the scene to do some testing. It's about getting on the scene right away and acknowledging that the people in this town are scared. They may very well be harmed by the pollution and by the toxicity that was released. And Bill, there was a huge explosion that looked like a bomb that went off in this town, and the water looks bad. So clearly something is going on the ground. And if you're interested in sort of reassuring people that it's going to be okay, that they don't have to pack up in their minivan and move away, and many of the residents of that town probably don't have the option of doing that, given their resources, then you say, okay, this is what went wrong. And if we don't know exactly how it happened, here's how we're going to get to the bottom of what happened. Here's the other government agencies that we're bringing in to help clean up the mess and help figure out what's going on with potential health risks. And here's how we're going to try to make it right to the citizens of this town who are scared and worried about the effects that this is going to have on them. And that's what we didn't see. So saying, well, gosh, it's not really a transportation problem. Well, the pollution is not a transportation problem, but it was caused by a transportation problem. So yeah, it is still in your wheelhouse to stand up and show some leadership.
Yeah, can I just respond, because I kind of have a personal story. Having dealt with Hurricane Ian about 5 months ago, basically a mile and a half from here was pretty much wiped off the map, Fort Myers Beach. And I can tell you firsthand, like, we were so grateful for FEMA. But when Joe Biden came through, he came about a mile from here. It was horrible. The traffic stopped. Nobody working to get people supplies they needed could get through. It was just sheer chaos for probably about 5 hours. And this was, luckily, it was a little bit after. I think it was about 4 or 5 days after the storm. But everybody was pissed off that he was there. They weren't happy that he was there. Of course, this is Florida, so maybe some of it has to do with that. But it didn't help things. And I think that if you just had Biden or Pete go down who had supplies, I think that's more important. And now would be a good time for that to start happening.
But let me ask you, Brian, why did it take 13 days for the EPA administrator to show up? What else is he doing? I mean, is there something else big going on that I'm missing?
I don't really have a reason for that, and I don't know. That's a good question. The EPA was there. The EPA was there. They were providing what was needed. But yeah, I think he should have been there probably a lot sooner.
I can explain why it took 13 days for the EPA to show up.
Oh, I'm sure this is going to be good. Let me just, because you are a supposed environmental investigator, so-called.
Not supposed. I'm actually the guy that investigated and exposed the Flint water crisis, and I'm a
okay,
consultant. I'm a consultant. I contribute to EPA Inspector General investigations. I work with special agents, etc. I will gladly send you their names. You can contact them if you would like a reference. If you're going to say supposed.
I will say supposed, but go ahead. Let's
well, if anybody would like to contact Dean at the special agent at the Seattle office of EPA Inspector General and confirm that I am in fact
it's fine, man. Let's hear what you have to say on the topic, please. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
Now jump in, Schizo. Matthew's mic is muted. Jump in.
Yeah, I guess so.
Sorry about that.
Hey. Yeah, sorry if I cut anyone off. I did want to bring some clarification to the earlier commentary on the CTEH contractor company. They were not going to East Palestine. That is not a company that Norfolk Southern has contracts with. The company that Norfolk Southern has contracted to do their testing and cleanup is a company called Arcadis US Incorporated. The CTEH was on its way to respond to a different incident at the I. Schumann and Company metal alloy manufacturing plant in Columbus.
Okay. So you're
Thank
saying
you very much for that extremely detailed.
Can I chime in for just a second because I have to drop off? So he's correct. They were responding to the metal alloy burning facility, but I said they were on the way to Ohio because there was an alloy incident. But I have to drop off because I have to jump on an interview with Tammy. But as someone who's an exposure scientist in both, so what everyone needs to understand is that these exposures to these types of toxicants are almost always in an occupational and industrial setting. So if anyone has any last minute questions before I have to drop off, and Benny, I'm going to slip into your DMs, as they say, to kind of give you some more information. But if anyone has a question, now would be the time to ask me before I have to drop off.
Wow.
I had a quick question.
I do have a final question, so here we go. I think that this is very important to break this down into a nomenclature that that people who are laymen can understand, and I certainly am one of those. And I just want to ask maybe an open question before some of the scientists and some of the more astute medical professionals drop off. They're clearly a room full of very bright, very smart people here. So I have an open question, and I would really love to hear around Robin here. If you were raising your family by the river in East Palestine, would you still be living in your home?
No, I would not. And this is why. From my perspective, I'm a root cause investigator. So the HVAC, the handlers in your system, because of the type of material this is, it can totally lie in the HVAC systems. This is why people need to go in and actually go in. And in an industrial setting, it's called pedo traverse. But you need to go into the HVAC handlers, not just the filter, and sample. So this is going to continue to get recirculated. And this is why if you have small children, you don't want them crawling on your carpet, on your ground. This is why swipe sampling needs to be done for presence absence, because for swipe sampling, it doesn't determine individual exposure. It is there. But if you have benzene in your house on your kitchen counter, like that is not normal. So for me, again, until we have all the continuous sampling to reduce the exposure behind background, absolutely no amount of money would allow me to stay where they are. And if you are a woman who's breastfeeding and you can get your hands on bottled water and your child, I'm not a pediatrician, but I do work in fetal protection, so I have to look at what affects a pregnant woman and an infant. If you can pump and dump, I would, until you're out of the area, and supplement with formula and clean water if you can. And I know everyone has different situations, but for me as a mom, that's what I would do.
Hi, I'm back on here. I would like to talk.
Yes,
about,
you are.
I would like to talk about being bullied by a political con man. And if you don't,
all right, but
can I speak?
You can speak, but you can speak on the topic.
You would
so
like to. I was trying to
say
speak on the topic. You won't let me. You started questioning my credibility before I even.
I think that's an important thing to do,
because you already know who I am, sir.
All right. I think that this is an important question.
Can you let me answer the question?
No, I want to hear from Benny first.
My question stands. I really want to know from the credential.
Okay, I would like to explain what I wanted to contribute to this conversation without having my credentials questioned, because they're legitimate and I've given you references. Is that fair?
Jeez. I mean, sure, but you gotta go here. We got people listening. We got other questions.
You're the one that's been delaying me speaking. I would have been done already. So what I would like to say is that I've investigated over 1,000 toxic incidents in this country. I work with the U.S. EPA Inspector General as a source. When a toxic incident occurs in this country, you have to remember that we have over 50,000 current toxic incidents in the United States. There's 1,300 Superfund sites on the national priorities list. There's 42,000 other sites on the non-NPL and non-standard lists. This is on top of 5,600 Department of Energy uranium cleanups. This is just our current existing environmental spills. So, for example, there's 800 people working at the Chicago EPA office, but there's only about 10 of them dedicated to current toxic spills. And so what they're dealing with every day is a desk filled with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of toxic incidents. They're receiving contacts 20, 30, 40 times a day requests from assistance from activists in their region. And so when a toxic incident like this occurs, they're not paying attention to it because of the vastness of the type of incident that's occurring. With East Palestine, I have worked with USGS scientists on this subject. I have spoken to everybody. I'm contributing an investigatory submission to the Office of Inspector General. It shows that this toxic incident relative to those other 50,000 toxic incidents is not remarkable. And when the EPA officials that know their job and know what they're doing saw it, they knew that it wasn't that big of a deal and they didn't respond. The water is not polluted. There is no clay barrier there in the soil. So
how could you possibly say that the water is not polluted?
Because I can prove
that.
I
can jump in.
Provide scientists and testing to prove that. If you look at the geology of the area, there's no soil barrier there. There's no clay barrier there. So the local municipal water wells have a steel plate over top of them to replace the clay barrier.
That's a very important distinction. Let me be clear. Municipal is a very important distinction because you have a lot of private wells. So that's very different, and I want everybody to know that. So go ahead, Matthew. You gotta unmute, Matthew.
Skid so you can jump in as well.
Yeah. So
hey, I do have to. Hey, real quick, I do have to drop off, but Tammy accidentally dropped off before we go to our interview. Can you bring her back on for just a second, and we'll both drop off to respond her opinion to Benny's question about if she had a family, would she stay there? Because she has a really good point. We're actually standing right next to each other, but
yes,
if you can add Tammy Clark. And
she has to request.
Okay, she did. Do you see her?
I do not.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure out, Kristen. Go ahead.
I can send her an invite.
Yeah, so in terms of the water in general, I've been following every statement that's been coming out from Arcadis, Norfolk Southern, and other public officials. The plan that they have in place at this moment for what Norfolk Southern is dubbing phase 1 of the cleanup is what they've done so far is as Nick probably saw when he was there along with Senator Vance, Leslie Run has those oil bins, which might go, oh, it's not a lot. What they were doing in the meantime, upstream from that section of Leslie Brook, they dug a entire side ditch to divert the water. They did the same thing with Sulphur Creek to prevent any further water from further upstream that's not contaminated from going into the contaminated area. They've pumped up, as of 5 days ago, pumped out over 900,000 gallons of water from that area that's being transported to a proper hazardous material soil place. They've also been scooping up, as of 5 days ago, over 3,000 cubic yards of soil with the plan to scoop up at least 9,000, so instead of cubic yards, 9,000 tons of soil from the area to make sure that the water, when they do release this temporary dam that they built and undo the trench that they did for the divergence, to make sure that all the water's good. Arcadis has also brought in scalding equipment to make sure that they get really deep under the town to make sure that no chemicals at all get into any underwater aquifers. To say that, stuff further downstream is highly contaminated, I think is just not true at this time. There's been no evidence from Arcadis, the state EPA, federal EPA, Norfolk Southern, or other companies that are involved with this. I have yet to see anyone publish something that shows a difference with the actual water levels so far. And to say that everyone involved, I mean, to insinuate
there's
that
the
many
city of
people
East Palestine too. Their
stuff.
testing showed there was nothing in the water either. They didn't file a Tier 1 Safe Drinking Water Act notice because there was nothing in the water. So even the water keeper there, who is independent of all the federal investigators and independent people, stated that there's nothing in that water. So every test, every independent test, every federal government person says, everybody, it's not just the government lying to people. This cause that people are trying to go after and claiming it's the next Chernobyl is just bullshit. And I'm sorry if people
Okay,
don't
so
like
when you
that.
have a sitting U.S. senator, both sitting, two parties. This is we're talking a
Oh,
Republican.
we know how
and a
honest
Democrat,
elected
US senator.
officials are.
Okay, well, you're not right. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, you're making my point for me, man. We know how honest. We know how honest these politicians are. Okay.
Well,
so,
I will say with the water. So the really great video, Nick did a really great video along with the senators, like the few people who've actually gone there, had some really great videos showing Leslie Run. Like that water in that area does not look great. Like I definitely want to drink that. But again, you have to look at what was Arcadis doing in the meantime. Like they were still constructing that ditch to divert the water, and that's been sucking over again 5 days ago at this point over 900,000 gallons of water, and they've prevented any new water from upstream coming into the area. So the water situation should be pretty much like absolutely resolved in the near future. We have yet to see what Arcadis and Norfolk Southern's phase 2 is. They haven't announced that yet. But as of phase 1, I'd say they're doing a damn good job. And again, the scalding equipment, like you don't just bring that in. Like they are definitely going above and beyond on this to make sure that there's no fucking chemicals anywhere. Like you don't just bring in scalding equipment. That shit is expensive to run.
Sure. Well, today, when there was it rained literally all day. It's still literally raining. Norfolk Southern had sent contractors out to do some additional work in the water, especially in the area where I did that video. And the reason being, because only one Norfolk Southern contractor has ever spoken to me, and it was this guy today. So I really appreciate him doing that. And I will not expose his face, but I'll post a video tomorrow, where he had mentioned that where they had dug the drains to empty these chemicals out, right, during this incident, because of the rains today, have been flowing into this stream, which is extremely important to note, because obviously they have not done what they've done has not been sufficient to stop this from continuing to run down these waterways. So. And you know, we did some tests on it today, and we're going to find out here hopefully in a few days.
Almost every
every
canal, river, tributary in Ohio is polluted with some form of PCBs or contamination already. Though that's something that hasn't been really addressed by anybody. Is all the prior.
Have you ever thrown a rock into a stream and it turned into a
Well,
rainbow?
I grew up on with the Ohio Canal in my backyard, where Goodyear Tire and Rubber dumped chemicals into my canal for 75 years. So I have, yes, seen things like that, unfortunately, in my own backyard in Akron, Ohio.
Okay, that's not relevant to the situation.
Well,
because,
it's
we're
worse,
talking about a small town.
actually.
Okay, well, it might be, and that needs to be remediated as well.
It was.
But we're looking at a place where kids used to play in the creek. Okay,
yes.
And now we're looking at, you walk up to it and you get this overwhelming chemical smell.
Yeah, but you're not suggesting there's not going to be remediation.
Yeah, but if you look at the distance from Leslie Run to the derailment site, right? Leslie Run is literally less than 50 feet away. It cross-sects under these tracks multiple times, and where the derailment occurred is literally less than 50 feet away.
People drinking that water?
Leslie Run. No, because they've diverted.
No, beforehand, before that, were they fishing or drinking out of that creek?
I don't know about drinking it. Typically, private wells go hundreds of feet deep because you have to tap into the underwater aquifers. So I don't know if they've had any surface level stuff like maybe the municipal water supply. I'm not an expert on that portion.
I'll have this verified, but I believe that the municipal wells. I believe the municipal wells in East Palestine are 56 feet deep. If somebody can verify and send that to me, that'd be awesome.
And so does anybody know how deep the aquifers are there?
No, I mean, I would imagine that you're an environmental investigator, right?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to. U.S. Geological Survey, one of the scientists that works for USGS, is working to confirm the depth of the aquifers. The other concern is that if they wouldn't have burned the vinyl chloride, which seemed to be the only option, I don't know exactly if that's true or not, it could have spilled into the aquifers and created a massive vapor intrusion issue in the groundwater aquifers, which would have made the entire town uninhabitable, like the Deco Superfund site in Des Moines, which is a large vinyl chloride plume. So when they eradicated the vinyl chloride into the atmosphere, they essentially, one of the things is one of the train cars had a malfunctioning valve system on it. So if that car would have exploded, it would have sent shrapnel, but it would have also damaged the structural integrity of the other cars and could have caused the worst environmental spill in U.S. history, 1 million pounds of vinyl chloride into an aquifer system. That town wouldn't be there anymore. That would have wiped out the town. But what we're trying to I have the scientists working right now, because depending on the depth of the aquifers, it's whether or not the vinyl chloride can make it to the aquifer, because when vinyl chloride hits soil, it rapidly dissolves as it goes down. And so when they go to remediate, to use monitored natural attenuation, which would be inserting bacteria into the soil to naturally degrade and eat it, but that takes years. And so they'll probably, if Norfolk Southern doesn't take responsibility financially for the cleanup itself, the Superfund will kick in, and under CERCLA, they will be held liable, and then the federal government will sue them for liability, and the federal government will clean it up. My opinion is that if Norfolk Southern cleans it up themselves, it'll be way faster than if the EPA does it, because the EPA likes to spend 40 years and send all their corrupt contractors in, and it turns into an all-you-can-bill the taxpayers buffet of environmental scientists raking cash in off of a Superfund cleanup.
I got to push back a little bit. Like, I hate to defend the government, but Class 1 railroads, particularly Norfolk Southern, has a history. They're a little bit cavalier, so to speak, when stuff like this happens. Their mentality is usually, as long as it's in our right of way, that's essentially the railroad terminology of their property, we don't have to clean it up. So, like, if there wasn't a concern about the water, they probably would have just been like, that brook is less than 50 feet from the railroad tracks. That's on our right of way. Don't need to touch it. Yeah, that's how they operate. That's how they've always operated.
But the thing is,
so I would rather have the EPA do the, like, if it, like, I hate the government on a lot of stuff, but Norfolk Southern particularly has a history of, if it's on our property, it's not our concern.
Unfortunately,
what happens
in this situation, what happens is the U.S. government has to give Norfolk Southern the option to clean it up first while they're engaging in CERCLA litigation. If Norfolk Southern commits to cleaning it up under the Superfund or CERCLA, then it deactivates the Superfund, essentially. And so that's a site like that would be like the Hudson River, where GE agreed to clean up the PCB spill in the river. And so that's not a Superfund site. That's a GE managed private government cleanup that's been going on for about 65 years, essentially.
Right.
Hey, Nick, do you mind if I if I say something really quick?
You are exactly who I wanted to bring in, and then we'll bring in Mark after that. So
this is one of the wildest things I've ever heard in my life. Let me just say, like, the soft bigotry of low expectations. This is the richest country in the history of the world. And what I have repeatedly heard people say is the reason why it's such a crazy tautology. The reason why this isn't a big deal is because a big deal happens all the time. That's insane. What an indictment.
Well, I'm just saying it's not a big deal relative to the size of other sites.
Sir.
I'm just saying it's not bad relative to other sites. I'm not saying it's not a big deal.
But listen, okay, for those who don't know about Cancer Alley in Louisiana, go and look at that. If you don't know anyone who's ever been affected by this, I'll give you one example of someone that a very close friend of mine, a relative of hers. This gentleman, he had to be treated by something called shake and bake, which was a type of terrible chemotherapy where they had to heat it up to an ungodly temperature, put him on a table that vibrated so they could try to get the boiling hot chemo all distributed throughout his body. This is the kind of stuff that happens when we pawn it off as not that big of a deal, because the truth is we don't yet know how big of a deal it is or it will become. And that's one of the reasons that when the government steps in and they start doing voluntary home
We do
buyouts
know
and
how
things
big
like
of a
that,
deal it is.
no, sir, you
No,
do
we
not.
do.
Because just like with
We absolutely do.
Listen,
Matthew, I'm going to let you
I'm
respond.
interrupting.
I'm going to
It's
let
kind
you
of funny how
respond.
it's it's bigger than Chernobyl. It's bigger than Chernobyl, and yet it's not that big a deal because this stuff happens all the time. And yet we talk about Chernobyl, we
I got
cite
a
it,
quick. That's not
40 years
Chernobyl.
after. And it's insane. To me, this is insane.
It
This is
is.
nowhere near Chernobyl.
I'm not
Chernobyl was a
making that claim,
radiological event that wiped.
Listen,
I'm
here's the
disabled
first
from
thing.
exposure
You
to
guys
toxic
need to
waste,
do.
by the way, just so you're aware. I've been disabled for 20 years from being exposed to toxic waste at a Superfund site that was filled with live bombs that was in my backyard. So when you want to
Again, these are completely different. This incident was roughly about 80 tons. That's a lot of stuff that spilled, right? Or was burned. Most of it was burned and went into the atmosphere. And at this point, it's been what, over 2 weeks? It's already dissipated. It's gone. Whatever wasn't immediately destroyed in the fire obviously went high up in the atmosphere, and it's over the Atlantic Ocean at this point. People across the East Coast took a bunch of really amazing videos at sunset last week, going, "Wow, sunset's really amazing." Yeah, that's because of the molecules that was left from the vinyl chloride burning off reacted with the sunlight, and you got these really vibrant sunsets for a couple of days last week. That shows that there's, at least from the air aspect, that whatever's there isn't over East Palestine anymore. It's gone across the rest of the East Coast, and it's whatever's left is somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah, that everyone gets to breathe, and be affected by for the rest of their lives. Right? I mean, no big
you
deal.
would never have made this argument
the air
with
quality. There's
Fukushima.
been no evidence. There's been no evidence to this point that the air quality anywhere has been negatively impacted. Again,
Except
like
for the
if
people who
that's the
can't
case,
breathe.
show me.
It just
Show
magically
me
goes away.
organizations
It just
show
goes into
me.
the ocean where it just magically goes away. The ocean is like a big toilet, that we all drink from, apparently. And that's totally fine.
Vinyl
No big deal.
chloride breaks down fairly rapidly when you burn it. So when it goes up in the air, whatever particles up there, so people have probably talked about the phosphine and whatnot, that dissipates and breaks down pretty rapidly within a couple days. This happened over 19 days ago. There's going to be like nothing left at this point in the atmosphere from the vinyl chloride.
Most of the scientists I've spoken to, it's only been a few, but they said that vinyl chloride will basically dissipate in the environment. It isn't like a forever chemical like PCBs are. So it will eventually break down and become less hazardous.
Hey,
Nick,
guys.
the problem
Kyle
is that
was.
you can't.
Kyle was.
Yeah,
I'm
let
going
me
to ask
just
for.
say-
I'm going to ask for everyone to be quiet while Kyle finishes his thought because he was rudely interrupted, and we would like to let Kyle speak and just finish his thought.
I appreciate that, you guys. Listen, I know everyone is passionate for various reasons, and they're bringing their resources to bear on the conversation. We should be able to disagree. I'm completely fine with that. But if you guys cannot see that there is a repeating problem here, we have a meta problem in this country, which is that in almost every domain that we touch, we are terrible at it. And not only are we terrible, we find a way to make it worse than it had to be. So if you're going to blow up, mitigate, spread to water and soil first. I'm not saying you deliberate for days and weeks and allow it to blow up. I'm saying you at least think about that and have a plan in place ahead of time before you start blowing it up. The fact that we have just bear with me for one moment. this may be a dead horse, but it's worth beating. When we rolled out the vaccine programs for COVID-19, one of the things that we did that was astounding to someone like me is we said we're going to roll this out and find out whether or not it's safe. This is just asinine, people. And the way that you justify this to yourselves, depending on what kind of political stripe you wear, it's an amount of cognitive dissonance that I can't wrap my head around. And I just want to say something to Nick, because for all the people on here that are running their mouths about how much they care, you actually put skin in the game, drove all night without sleeping. And for those of us who were listening to you in real time, the fact that you couldn't even get past Columbus without wondering, hey man, am I about to die? Like, what is this I'm smelling? So for people to say like, oh, there's no problem here, it's sure some of the toxic vapors could be evaporated, but anyone who is in proximity to breathe it in has breathed it in, and we don't yet know what the damage will be. So this is just, have you never read Hume and the Problem of Induction? You can't make a prediction about something like this. It has to unfold in real time, which is why you act quickly, expeditiously, and try not to foobar it, which is what we seem to be great at right now across the board. I think that for all of us, there comes a point where we say, this is just too much. And I don't know what it was for all of you, but for those of us who've lost loved ones in these overseas adventures and wars that we had, for me, it was the pullout of Afghanistan. What a miserable display of incompetence. And again, we see it happening. And so what do all of those things have in common? There's a common denominator here.
Incompetence from who, Kyle?
Are you?
Yeah, I'm asking from incompetence from who?
Our federal government? I mean, our federal government? What, I don't understand what you're asking. Most of you don't know the timeline for right now. Hurricane Michael happened just prior to my oldest daughter's birth, and it hit everyone in the in the Panhandle of Florida, along with some of our major Air Force bases. They are still right now. They just signed the first voluntary home buyout. That's over 4 years. These people have been waiting. So when people just say like, "Oh, there's going to be checks written and all of this," you guys are out of your minds if you think that's how the federal government works. There's not going to be a check cut tomorrow for these hurting families. What's going to end up happening is most likely there'll be a grassy knoll there where no one will ever be able to live. And for those of you who have never been connected to a place or to a land, like many of these people in East Palestine, you have no idea what that kind of displacement feels like. So it's fine for you to sit there and say, having no skin in the game, this isn't as bad as Chernobyl. Oh my God. If that's the standard, then we've lost ourselves. I don't even know what to say. I can't even believe what I'm hearing.
Well, Benny, the thing is, this incident, I don't think we should be comparing it to Chernobyl, because that was literally on a whole nother level, right? One's nuclear and one is chemical. If we want to do comparisons, we should look at other industrial chemical accidents, not radiological. So I would compare 2000s where 2 trains had a head-on collision with a release of chlorine gas, or we could look at a much larger rail incident up in Canada in 2013 with the Lake Megadantique incident, where over 100 rail cars of oil exploded and literally wiped out an entire town, killing hundreds of people. We could look at, if we don't want to do a rail incident, we could look at the East Texas fertilizer plant explosion, also in 2013. I think these are far better comparisons than going to the worst nuclear accident in human history, which was far different in every aspect than a reckless train derailment. I mean, from the response side, looks like they did a pretty good job in the response. You can criticize the evacuation. That I could agree. Maybe the evacuation radius should have been more than a mile. But you got to look at the firefighters' training. I've been a firefighter for a decade. When you get your firefighter one, you have to get what's called hazmat operations certification, and you're issued a little orange book. Railroad guys have it, truckers have it. It's called the Emergency Response Guidebook. It has every chemical known to man, and it tells you what to do when there's an accident, particularly when it's on fire. They literally opened the book and they were like, "Hey, conductor, what's on your train?" They go, "Hey, vinyl chloride." Okay, flip. Okay, on this page, what does it say? Evacuate 1 mile. They did everything according to their training. And then again, the train was on fire for over 20 miles before it derailed. Fire department shows up. Multiple cars were probably on fire at this point, and they're like, "Hey, we potentially could have a levee here that could result in something similar to Lake Meganantique, because this train also had some oil on it, along with other flammables." And they were like, "Yeah, do we want this town wiped off the map, or do we want to control burn this?" We could criticize that, and that's a very fair thing to criticize the burning aspect. But that decision had to be made very quickly on what to do nothing, or wait long enough and have a giant explosion that could kill hundreds of people and wipe the town off the map, or dump the chemicals and burn it and save a lot more people and prevent way less damage.
Okay. Okay. So we have this conversation going about Chernobyl. Chernobyl was brought up, obviously one of the largest, maybe the most notable chemical disaster in history. Mark Nelson is on and has been very patient. And Mark Nelson is a nuclear expert and is interested in saving nuclear plants, actually, according to his Twitter bio. Perhaps he could illuminate for us the differences between this and Chernobyl, and also what we should expect in the future here as it pertains to energy.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So there's almost the day that this happened, people were saying, "Hey, this is as bad as Chernobyl. It's worse than Chernobyl." Other people were jumping in to say, "No, it's not nearly as bad as Chernobyl." One thing I wanted to say, radiological accidents get mythologized extremely rapidly, and they often cause a ton of panic in the government itself. Not necessarily in first responders, who are often pretty hardcore people, quite brave, dedicated, trained to deal with tough circumstances, but political decision makers have a history of getting confused and panicked about radiological emergencies. The reason I bring this up before I mention some of the dimensions of Chernobyl and then Fukushima that are relevant for this discussion, I'll mention that that's because traditionally anything involving radiation triggers fear about the most powerful weapons and catastrophes ever imagined or occurring. So people hear radiation, they hear the sound of clicking Geiger counters, and it reminds, especially an older generation of politicians and citizens, it reminds them of fear from the Cold War, or going back further, of the dawn of the nuclear bomb age. Some of you may think, "Oh, no, we can tell the difference between nuclear energy and nuclear power plant meltdowns and bombs." I assure you, for the vast majority of older folks, they have a very difficult time distinguishing anything involving radiation in a setting outside a hospital is something that triggers fears and memories of the end of the world, of panicking, of thinking you're going to die. That's part of the reason why decision makers themselves respond so harshly and often so disorderly to anything involving radiation at nuclear plants. So, for example, at Chernobyl, we have by far the worst radiological accident ever from a civilian nuclear plant. But even then, it's been mythologized beyond what Chernobyl is. So if we saw comments from day one on this train disaster, people saying it's worse than Chernobyl, well, Chernobyl, the meme, was worse than Chernobyl, the molecules and the radiation. And I'm wanting to point out that if, depending on who you ask, there are people who claim that millions died from Chernobyl, and then the scientific consensus with the UN is up to 2,000 lives may be shortened from it, with 50 deaths linked to the immediate aftermath of the accident itself, some disasters during cleanup, and then finally a cohort of people that got a certain contaminant, radio contaminant, in high enough dosages to be scientifically linked to a particular type of cancer. That may sound very specific, but the reason I bring it up is because, well, Chernobyl kept operating for 14 years. It's a major tourist hotspot when the nation where it's located is not in a war. And yet, even though there has not been an active reactor there for 22 years, the amount of fear and panic that we had a year ago when Russian troops swept through Chernobyl in the opening days of the war was massive. Whereas the actual radiological problem there was essentially nothing. It still could have been safe for tourists, except for the war going on, which is not safe for tourists. Why do I bring this up? Because a key part of radiological accidents are not just the link to nuclear war and those fears. That's, you might call that the bad side of the panic being induced by radiological accidents. The difference from a chemical accident is that even the cheapest, crappiest handheld sensors and detectors can go beep, beep, beep and tell you that radiation in some level is present. Not necessarily a dangerous level, but it is extremely easy for detectors to detect radiation compared to the cost and sophistication of the instruments required to check for a dizzying array of chemicals that may result from a spill of several different substances plus the burn that occurred that would have created its own wave of chemicals. I'm not saying that to say that I'm siding with one side or another on this debate about East Palestine, just that in a radiological emergency, you can have devices that easily check and measure dosage. Now, even that's not a guarantee when is this from maybe the sensor network being messed up? We don't have quite the equivalent that we can just roll out immediately for East Palestine, though that may be one of the responses that would answer the question of, oh, should people stay in the house? To put my own little answer on the line, and I also want to thank Nick for going in person, I think that matters. That on-site presence matters, regardless of what you find. I think that does matter in people coming to this space and listening to your coverage. What I will say about myself is if I, without expertise in chemotoxins, but some expertise in disasters involving radiation, what would I do if I were in East Palestine? Not understanding chemical disasters maybe, but understanding a bit of emergency disaster management and of the way that we mythologize accidents immediately. One, I would make sure that any consumed water is bottled or filtered. Two, I would stay pending the results of and the continuing results of the independent testing. So in other words, more conservative than perhaps some people would be, but less conservative than what we've heard from the very credentialed and quite interesting ladies who are on talking about the testing. And the reason is because the central principle for both chemotoxic and radiotoxic events, when they're not acute enough to be causing direct injuries, and I know we've heard about coughing and blood from the chemical event, assuming that's not continuing, say, literally today, I would say that the key phrase that just goes around the mind of engineers on cleanup stuff, the solution to pollution is dilution. The enemy of dilution, and therefore, is bioaccumulation. At that point, I would have to turn over and try to find experts I trusted, both inside and outside the institutions, I would say, to compare. But at least on radiation, I would argue that what we've heard tonight, where people have said radiation is this unique, special threat, of course, it's way more dangerous to have a radiation accident. Let's talk about chemical accidents instead. I would probably put that on its head. We have a radical amount of information about radiation from a huge number of cohorts all around the world, both intentional and unintentional exposures, both occupational exposures, accident exposures. We know an immense amount about radiation compared to a number of chemical toxins. I would argue that not only should we not compare this to Chernobyl, arguably it's because it's not that it's worse or less worse, but because it's different. And thanks for having me, Nick.
So let me ask Aaron.
Nick, can I just say something? Nick, I've been waiting for a while to speak.
Yeah, briefly if you can, because I need Aaron to hit on that point. So on the
this just seems really fucking crazy to me, man. It's like the Republicans are all of a sudden became environmentalists.
Okay, well, Joe, we're going to get into trust me, we're going to get into politics here very shortly. But I want to I'm going to go to Aaron first because we're talking about potential health ramifications here, and that's pretty important. So I'm sorry, Joe, I will get back to you.
So the appropriate medical precautionary principle would be to assume toxicity and assume harm until proven otherwise. And when I hear people getting on and saying there is no evidence that there is harm, the response to that is there is no evidence that it is safe, or there is little evidence that it is safe. And so I appreciate the previous recommendation to drink only bottled water. And for most of the people on that space, you probably wouldn't think twice to do that, but realize how a lot of working class people live paycheck to paycheck. An added expense like bottled water may be too much for them.
Yes.
And so just recognizing, and this will get into a little bit of the politics and optics, but I'm speaking about it from a health perspective. Thing had happened not in East Palestine, but in Seattle or Boston or San Francisco. Do we think the response from federal leaders and federal agencies and from the legacy media would have been what it was to this accident? I think it's almost impossible to imagine that. It's certainly impossible to imagine the people of Seattle or San Francisco being satisfied with the responses that they've been given and the kind of tepid reassurances that this isn't going to be so bad. So you assume, especially if you can look in the water and see that it looks and smells like shit, believe the evidence of your own senses, you assume that it's probably not a good idea to drink this. It's probably not great to be breathing a lot of this air. And so let's do everything we can to protect people, especially people that are under-resourced, people for whom simple interventions would actually be quite difficult, people who may be at high risk of medical harms, who would have a difficulty getting out of the city for a few days because, if they leave their job at the factory or whatever, they're going to lose their job. So, how do we help those folks, and how do we help the people on the coasts not look with a sort of disdain or lack of interest in, and I hate using this term because this term itself is part of the problem, but the people in the flyover country, the people who feel forgotten, you see something like this, and to me, it's not hard to understand why folks in small towns in the middle of the country do feel forgotten. Because what I see here is a kind of benign neglect, and it's not to detract from any of the real cleanup efforts that have already gone on, and we've heard from folks on that. All that is to the good. But again, do that little thought experiment. Imagine this happening in Seattle or Boston, and imagine what kind of response we would be seeing from the nation's leaders. And then ask yourself, why would they get a different response than the people in East Palestine?
Well, can I jump in here just to piggyback off that?
Certain.
Yep, sure.
So, not to be disrespectful, but in our fields, when you're testing, when you're going into an unknown atmosphere, you actually have to treat every environment as IDLH and immediately dangerous to life and health if you don't know. And we're dealing with not just vinyl chloride, but butyl acrylate. We're dealing with isobutylene. We're dealing with 45 chemicals here. And nobody is talking about the synergistic toxicity of the cumulative effects on the organs. And we don't know what we're dealing with. So you don't assume it's safe until proven otherwise. In our field, you assume it's immediately dangerous to life and health until proven it's safe. So it's actually quite the opposite from the field of environmental health and safety and testing. You don't go in and say, oh, I think it's safe because it's not proven otherwise. You actually go into a situation like this and you say, we have to assume it's immediately dangerous to life and health until we prove otherwise. And what I would tell the people of East Palestine is that they were given a 5-minute warning. We have the texts that show they were given 5 minutes to shelter in place before this burn happened. And that's not enough time. And then in addition to that, they were not told how to shelter in place. So we had this major burn, which we don't know because we don't have the data that they may have had to do to avoid an explosion. So I don't want to get into that just simply because we don't have the data. But they were not told how to shelter in place. So they did not shut off their HVAC systems. They did not tape and seal their windows and doors. They did not shut off their vents, cover their vents. And so everything that was burned outside is inside all these homes. So these people need to understand all of these chemicals are at every surface in every home, and that's incredibly dangerous. We know that there are multiple chemicals here that create a synergistic toxicity because yes, while one thing may affect one organ, when you have multiple chemicals that affect the same target organ, you have an increased toxicity, which is a synergistic toxicity. So these people should not be in their homes. They don't understand that babies crawling on floors, walking on your floors, cooking on surfaces, sleeping in beds, they're releasing and re-aerosolizing these chemicals and breathing them in. And that's an incredibly dangerous thing because we don't know. We don't have the data, but we do know that they're being exposed at levels that are far above and beyond what is safe for them.
So we'll go ahead and bring Joa in. Say there's a lot of politics going around this. Obviously, we had Trump visiting today. That was very interesting. I think that was a big morale booster for a lot of people here. And I know that I've spoken with so many of them that it's almost like it would probably boggle most of your mind. That's what I've been doing for 9 days now. So, Joa, tell me what you think about the politics of the entire thing.
I mean, it's more than the politics. Like, we were on the subject talking about the train, right? And why are there more accidents? Does it seem that there's more train accidents in the US than there is in Europe? And then someone came up, I don't remember who, said, but there's a lot more kilometers of track. How many kilometers there are means nothing for how many accidents there are. It's how many accidents per 1,000 kilometers traveled. That's typically how you measure safety. And that's where America falls way below the bar of Europe, right? It actually falls below the bar for driving as well, just normal vehicles. And that's because of the safety standards that is required in the US versus in Europe. A lot of those safety standards were reduced in 2017. The Clean Water Act was reduced. The Clean Air Act was reduced. The braking thing for the brakes for trains was reduced. All this shit was reduced. What's crazy to me now is though Democrats are defending.
Let me ask you real quick, Joe. Would that have made any difference for the train crash here in East Palestine?
I have no idea, but does having cleaner water something you should apply, like something that should be rolled back, or having cleaner air? I think that's kind of good things. And if you look at the history of Europe, those rules are in place. You have to have an updated train, just like you can't have as old of a car as you have in the US driving on the road, because of protection of other people. It's not an infringement on your rights because you want to drive an old jalopy whose brakes can break down. No, you're a danger to other people around you, period. Right? And those things in US get by because of this thing about, oh, but I'm supposed to be free and be able to do what I want to do. And if I'm a coal plant, I should be able to dump my waste in local streams, which is what happened in 2017. Right? Does that make sense to you? Should we protect people or have some kind of rule? So regardless if it would have made a difference in this accident or not, it doesn't matter. They're good rules to have to be able to protect people.
Yeah, so in terms of the 2017 rule, specifically to the brakes, I've seen people talk about the ECP brake rule. This would have made zero difference in this particular incident. Why?
In this
Because
particular
that
incident, but not other ones.
Well,
Not other derailments that have happened. Yes, there was. In Texas, there was just one.
Let Intel finish his point. You can respond to it.
Yeah, so this was a Obama era rule that talked about the specific type of brakes you would need for what's called a high hazardous flammable train, and this train did not meet the qualification to be a HHFT. There's a very good argument to be made that perhaps we should not have changed the rules. There was recommendations on what should be considered a HHFT, but in this particular case, even if the ECP brakes were on this train, it would not have made a difference. When you look at the timeline of how this derailment happened, it flew by a hotbox detector in Salem, Ohio. For whatever reason, we don't know if that detector was working or if the crew was notified. For whatever reason, the crew was not notified that there was a fire on an axle towards the rear of the train. It then passes by I believe the meat packaging plant shortly after, and we see in that security camera video, one of the cars is on fire. It travels for 20 miles and then passes the East Palestine hotbox detector, where the crew is then alerted, you got a fire. And the train engineer immediately applied the emergency brakes, and then the train derailed, probably with, according to the NTSB, shortly thereafter. So pretty quickly, as soon as the brakes were applied, the train derailed. And that's because the train would have been on fire for 20 miles. Even if it had ECP brakes, it's still going to take well over a mile for the train to stop. And this train was already going fairly slow based off the speed restrictions going through a residential area, plus all the railroad crossings in that particular sector. It's still going to take a long time to stop, but these brakes would not have made a difference at all because the brakes were already compromised due to the fire for over 20 miles.
Yeah, never said
there
it
is a
would.
good argument to be made. I will agree. There's a very good argument to be made about the classification of a HHFT, which currently is dealing with class 3 flammable liquids, and this was carrying class 2 flammable liquids. There's a very good argument to be made about that. But even if that rule was in place, this train would not have qualified because it did not have the number of requisite cars needed to be considered a HHFT.
So why do you think the reason people bring up the ECG is? I mean, I see a lot of political reasons for it, but I'd like to hear from the rest of the audience here. Why do you think people bring up the electronic brake thing?
Well, I wasn't done, Ian. I'm not bringing it up saying that it would have made a difference here, and never even suggested that. And when I was asked, I said no. Right? It's not about that. I don't mean
you, Joe. I don't mean you. I mean, I just mean in general. Like earlier, we had like some doctor up here, and he brought it up, and the implication is that it's Trump's fault, right? And we actually have a new news story that's out right now of some local channel that's blaming Trump for this whole thing.
Well, it's because he made the decision at the end of the day. This isn't 100% Trump's fault. There should be more anger towards the chemical industrial lobbyists. They're the ones who really pushed for this to happen, along with the railroad, the class 1 railroads. A combination of those two lobby groups were the ones who heavily lobbied saying, whoa, like, don't put class 2 flammable. This happened during the Obama administration too, when they initially made this rule, because originally class 2 flammable liquids would have been on that list per the recommendations from NTSB and the FRA. But due to that lobbying, that was dropped in the Obama era rule. And then so at the end of the day, though, Trump was the one who made the executive order. So there should be at least some degree of ire, but and it's the same thing I've been saying about like Mayor Pete. He's the head of the DOT. The real question should be, where the hell's the FRA on this? No one's seen anything from the FRA. They've made like one statement, and it was go see the NTSB. That's it. Like, why are we talking about where the hell the FRA is? That's their job.
They're doing a lot. They're really doing a lot. So
yes, they're doing the investigatory stuff, But at the end of the day, why isn't the FRA like? Stop blaming the head of the Department of Transportation. Why hasn't the head of the FRA come in? Like,
Sure. I mean,
the head of the FRA is in charge of railroads.
I don't even want to make this like was it Trump or Obama or is it Biden? Like, I honestly believe things take a long time. Decisions from previous presidents affect current presidents. Like, it's not like Biden ruined the economy. There was things done by Trump. There was things done by Obama. There was things done by Bush. There's a succession to everything. But what's crazy to me, and like, I don't know if I should laugh or cry, check myself into a mental institution. I'm hearing typically Republicans worry about the environment, and I'm hearing Democrats say we should protect Ukraine even if we go to war. And that's what's driving me. That's showing me how polarized everyone is. That typically Democrats are so anti-war and Republicans are more business forward than worrying about the environment. But now we all switch sides because of who's in office. It's crazy.
Yeah, I don't think Ukraine has any role in this. I think it's a little disingenuous to go, oh, but Ukraine. Like this was a hazmat incident. The people responsible for hazmat incidents is the company that spilled it. So Norfolk Southern is responsible. The federal government in a hazmat spill plays a more of an administrative role and a investigatory role. They're not as much involved in a hazmat spill. At the end of the day, this will be Norfolk Southern's responsibility and the company they've contracted, Arcadis US Incorporated. It's their responsibility. The federal government has very little in terms of the actual on-the-ground cleanup. If you want to critique this current process, that's a fair thing to critique. But in terms of the actual response, it's the Norfolk Southern's responsibility. And to say, oh, but Ukraine has nothing to do with it. It's Norfolk Southern.
Yeah.
No,
right. I want to let Tom jump in. I'm sorry, I don't know if Eden was trying to speak or not. My bad. But yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to get Tom in here. I know you've been trying to speak for a while, and I'm sure you have a lot to say on this too. Got to unmute Tom.
The danger we're facing is an environmental catastrophe. It's the sort of leftist response to incidents like this, which is to call for more government regulation that would harm the very people they're pretending to protect. And, you know, this whole brake regulation thing and Pete Buttigieg immediately blaming Trump, I mean, just shows you just how awful the politics around this is. And it's all about taking care of your very special interests. And, you know, no, I didn't become an environmentalist with this train crash. In fact, I see this as another opportunity for environmentalists to further hamper and ruin our economy for no good end other than to increase state control for their own particular interests here, which isn't anything to do with the environmental movement, but with controlling the private sector. And so if we want our goods to be in this age of stressed supply chains, to make it harder to transport energy products, which is kind of what this whole initial effort for from the Obama administration was about, which was making it nearly impossible through these onerous regulations to transport oil. That's going to be the issue here. So the danger is folks like Pete Buttigieg, focusing on irrelevant regulatory pushes in reaction to what is an issue that, as I think we've heard quite credibly from Intel, that is going to be handled fine in the end.
I'd like to jump.
When you have these turf wars, I mean, what we're seeing here is a leadership vacuum to be able to prioritize and put first things first. And this is not a partisan issue. When you have three-letter agencies arguing about, who's running point and whose responsibility is this, and no one seems to want to take responsibility for quarterbacking the management of the current situation, right? Not, okay, a year or two from now, if you want to do a retrospective, and look at what regulations might have contributed to this or what policies might have contributed to this. That's something you can argue about after the whole mess is cleaned up. But right now we're seeing a leadership vacuum. We're not seeing someone stepping in and saying, okay,
well, we
this
have
is
the train company stepping in and have done much of the cleanup already. I mean, come on.
Well, I'm
The
talking
government,
about
I mean, what do you
at
expect from the government?
at the federal level. I expect a leader to at least say this agency is in charge of this, and these other three agencies.
Yeah, well, I mean, that
going to be-
happened relatively quickly. I mean, this was about the raw, Pete Buttigieg misjudging the public interest in this. And, he's seen as someone who needs to be protected by the political class because he's seen as a likely successor to Biden. It had nothing to do with, a leadership at the federal level. It's just politics, and this is to be expected in situations like this. And Pete Buttigieg probably, to a degree, he had any inklings to run for presidency or had chances. I think we saw those dissipate significantly, just like the vinyl chloride is seemingly dissipating in Ohio as we speak.
So I agree with your Buttigieg, your statement, but if I hear you correctly, you're basically saying that, if someone wants to build a high-speed rail and put chlorine trifluoride, which is one of the most flammable chemicals on Earth, and put it on a high-speed rail, they should be able to, because there should be no government regulation. Although that could probably wipe a town off the face of the earth if it ever crashed. Is that what you're saying? That there shouldn't be regulation?
So freight rail cannot go faster than 80 miles an hour. But you're going to be hard pressed to find a rail in this country that's in good enough condition to let the train go 80 miles an hour. I briefly worked at a class 2 railroad on the East Coast, and on paper, our timetables say speed limit X, but because the rails were laid in the 1930s, they're so degraded that there's so many speed restrictions to keep the train from derailing that you can only go 10 miles an hour, even though on the timetable it says the speed limit's much, much higher.
I'm just trying to make a point. When does regulation make sense, though? Do you know what I mean? Like, I understand it's not possible. I understand it's not possible because of the rails. I'm being fictitious when I'm saying a high-speed rail, but I'm just saying when, based on what Tom was saying, is regulation needed finally? Because
I'm not saying there's no regulation. Rails are almost always a federal matter, and they probably always practically will be. The question is, what is the appropriate level of regulation? And I'm saying that the socialists running our government have zero interest in appropriate levels of regulation. It's all about advancing a different interest, which has nothing to do with safety. It's more taking care of special interest, the radical environmentalists who hate infrastructure, hate oil, hate energy, and taking care of the union interests. So automation is frowned upon, and the regulations are geared towards making it harder to transport the goods the left hates.
Tom,
hey everyone, hey everybody, I just need to hop in here and say that I have got to get on preparing our show for the morning, and so I want to thank Mario and Nick and everybody who has done an absolutely spectacular job and an illuminating job. And I think I'm going to book like 4 or 5 different guests from this show because it's been absolutely fascinating. Ultimately, I did want to end with one final thing before this debate continues, because it's not ending with me.
It is actually. So
is it? Okay.
Your final statement, yeah.
All right.
I got to be up at 7 a.m. to go find Buttigieg. So
there you go. I don't think that this is about. I don't think this is about conservatives suddenly becoming environmentalists. I think that the left has become illiberal, to be quite honest with you, and I'll get to that. But I think that the Conservative Party and the Republican Party have become populists, and at its core, populists don't want to destroy the economy or destroy really anything. We love our fellow American, and we want to see them live with clean water and clean air and clean soil, and I think that's pretty basic. And we want the government to do the damn effing life worse for us to make life better. And that's what a populist would do. A populist would care about the people of East Palestine. And if you don't care about those people, then you're a very bad person. because those people are the salt of the earth, and their earth has been poisoned. And so anyone with a soul should actually care. This is not necessarily about politics. This is about humanity. Now, the only reason I would say that the left has become fascistic in this and has become illiberal is because it's a very liberal thing to care about your fellow human being, to care about their free speech, and to care about their life and their health. It's a very liberal, classically liberal thing to care about. It is unfortunate that the modern day left has decided to calculate everything based on power matrices and multiplication tables for where they can get more power, and they can just get no power out of this circumstance. And that's what I saw on the ground. And so, because this was a forgotten part of America, and these were the unfavored poor of this country, as many people have brought up, they were ignored, and that's wrong. And it would be wrong if it happened in New Orleans or Detroit. It would also be wrong. And I would hope that as a populist, that people would say that also the lives of Detroit matter, and the lives of Philadelphia matter just as much. And so, quite frankly, I think that is the right take on this. And I believe that the best result that we could possibly ask for is for people to actually care about these people. And that's why I asked the question, would you raise your kids next to the river in East Palestine? If you can answer yes, then you should be able to tell us why you're not, that you're not suicidal. And I think that most people, honestly, I mean, truly, honestly, in the small hours of the night, would say, no, I actually wouldn't right now. I would not like to raise my kids there. And so if you wouldn't like to do it, then what about the people who are stuck there? And perhaps that's something that everyone should consider if you claim to care about your fellow American. That's all I have to say.
Man, Benny, we always love to have you on here. It's awesome. I wish we could have you more. But yeah, again, just to reiterate, thank you for coming here. You did a hell of a lot for these people. I mean, there's actually your pin post over there on your profile, has you handing $1,000 to residents. I believe the total was $20,000 total to various residents here in East Palestine. So you really kicked some ass. You've been getting the word out, and I hope you continue to do that because these people really need it.
And Nick, since you're not going to give credit to yourself, man, credit to you. Losing your mind and doing everything you've been doing. Any final words for the audience, man? This space was done for you in your honor. And so I'll give you the mic, man, to wrap it up.
Yeah, well, this isn't the last one here, but I'm exhausted. There's going to be a lot more tomorrow, too. Probably be here until, at least a few more days. I said, okay, so I'll be honest, in the beginning when I got here, I packed for a day. I was going to drive up. I was going to be here all day. I was going to drive back home the same day. It's now been 9 days. So stuff keeps developing here. I think we're making a hell of a lot of progress. But there's still a lot more to uncover. But I do want to mention the idea of what has transpired over the past 9 days, actually. We've seen all of a sudden started getting media attention. I said in the beginning in the space, when I got here, there were no cameras here. There were no journalists. It was nothing. It was just the townspeople, but not a lot of them actually, because, a lot of them still haven't come back. They're afraid to bring their kids here for all the reasons that we've talked about tonight. And it's something that really needed to be highlighted in the media. And again, thankful for people like Benny that came and actually helped me do that. And now we've seen a little bit of a government response. Why did it take until yesterday, literally yesterday, for the EPA to, officially order Norfolk Southern to clean up exactly what they did here? Why did it take 13 days?
Have you spoken to anyone? Have you spoken to anyone from the EPA?
They will not talk. Everybody here.
Do you think we can get him? Do you think we can get someone from the EPA or someone that used to work in the EPA onto the space?
I can.
I would love to. Okay,
Matthew,
do it.
Yeah, Matthew, DM me. Please DM me, Matthew. It'll be a pleasure.
Wait a minute.
We'll talk offline.
Who are you looking for specifically? So there's
DM me, bro. DM me. We'll talk offline, just because I know we're wrapping up the space. But DM me and we'll talk offline and bring someone in.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'll get somebody for sure. I know plenty of people that would like to talk.
I've posted numerous times. If you type in, I think I actually have in the nest too, but for the EPA specifically, they do have a specific person that they've established. If you're on Google, you can just type in EPA East Palestine site profile. It'll probably be one of the first search results. that has at the top of the page the person that you go to specifically, and then I believe the other person you would go to is the EPA.
We're connected on WhatsApp. Let's chat.
We're also talking about trying to get people on the space.
I actually contribute to the investigations that investigate EPA officials. So a lot of them, don't like to talk to me, but I know some that would like to talk. I'm sure.
We'll sort it out, Matthew. We'll sort it out offline. I appreciate you offering this. Tara, good to have you back on stage.
Hey, thanks for the invite. I know you're trying to wrap it up, so I'll keep it brief, but I wanted to ask Nick, well, first I want to thank you, Mario, Nick, and Benny for putting this together last minute. But Nick, are you fearful at all spending as much time as you have been over there? Are you, what precautions are you taking?
I'll be honest with you, not a lot of precautions, which I should be. I dove into this head first.
Yeah.
It was
Sorry, it's incredible.
But when I first came here, I was a little worried. I'll be totally honest, but and I am still worried. I worry about like when I walk up to a stream and I just have this really strong. There's this really strong odor of chemicals that just inundates your nose. You can feel it go down your throat. I mean, it's awful. But looking at the precautions that I've taken, I will say I will not drink the water here. I booked a hotel that is 15 miles out of town. I checked I checked where the streams actually go to make sure that water wasn't running down to the city or the town that I'm staying in right now. So to that extent, yes, I've taken those precautions, but am I worried about the long-term health ramifications? Absolutely. I actually am. And I think about it at night, and because I haven't been here for 9 days, but then I look back at all these people that are literally living there, that are trapped there, and it's the problems for them are much bigger. That's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the problems for me. So.
I just want to thank you for being, boots on the ground and getting there and being brave enough to put your life, I mean, literally at risk to go and report back to all of us here on Twitter. This has just been incredible. I mean, watching Mario host these spaces everywhere from, crypto craziness and scam stuff going on with FTX to Elon Musk to Benny freaking Johnson, who I never thought I would ever be in the same space with ever in my life. And then I'm a huge fan of yours, by the way, too. And just how much work you guys do and effort you put in. Thank you. And Nick, just stay safe. And if you need anything, if you need, food money or water bottle money or anything, just let me know. And I have Cash App. I can afford to send you something, monetary wise, in order to keep this going, because it's really important that we have someone firsthand, who shows up. I mean, you did this outside of the hospital when, everything was happening with Hamilton and everything. It's incredible that you're able to go and do these things and then be here and reporting back to everybody live on Twitter. It's absolutely incredible. So thank you.
Hey,
final
thing,
Nick. Yeah.
Final thing,
you need
guys.
any more cash, Nick? I'll Venmo whatever you need. And when I was trying to describe leadership, that's what you did. Leadership was what you did. You went.
If people believe that Nick deserves a Pulitzer Prize, throw up some applause. Throw up some emojis. No. Because if there was
Mario
if we lived in a just world, he'd be winning a Pulitzer.
Yeah, you don't want one of those though.
I really appreciate that, Benny. It means a lot coming from you. But I disagree though. But yeah.
Of course.
Maybe we need a Twitter. Maybe Elon Musk needs to invent his own Twitter prizes, Twitter Pulitzer Prize. Our version of it.
You gotta
people.
remember that all the Pulitzer leaders today, the voting members, are the same guys that told us that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So,
can I just, I hate to rain on the parade here, but let's not instill fear in the population where fear isn't warranted. This was a terrible situation. People's lives were put at risk for a period of time. The long-term consequences of this are far from clear. Everything that I've read suggests that the town will get through this okay, and there'll be plenty of money to help them get through it. So this is not like they're about to die tomorrow, and the lack of attention initially was a big problem. And we were right. Benny and others were right to call attention to this, but we're over the hump, and there's no one facing imminent risk of death or even damage to their health based on everything that's going on that we know about right now. So it's great there's attention being paid here, but the crisis is over. And let's be clear about it, and let's not overreact in terms of policy and
Tom, because
politics.
until water is drinkable and potable, like how can you even say such a thing?
It is drinkable and potable. Now, many people choose not to, and I don't blame them for it. But all we can say is it being
who's saying
tested
that it's drinkable?
Is it being
The
tested
entire
repeatedly?
leadership of East Palestine, the state of Ohio, through the state EPA. You have EPA Region 5. You have EPA at the federal level. You also have Norfolk Southern. You have Arcadis US Incorporated. You also have the local emergency manager, the chief of the fire department, the chief of police. You have the Ohio, the wildlife folk from the state of Ohio as well, and the governor of Ohio. How many more public officials do you need to say that the water's safe to drink? Plus, we have all of these agencies that are each doing their own investigation, their own sampling, their own testing, and then you also have the private companies that are working at behest to make sure that the government and Norfolk Southern are doing their jobs correctly. And at this point, there's not a single one of these agencies that have data that show that the water or the air is unsafe.
That's my other question, Nick. Do you know if Erin Brockovich ever showed up over there? I know that she had mentioned, going to Palestine, Ohio. Do you know if she ever made rounds there?
We're in contact.
I'm with Tara with Nick on this. I don't think it's safe. Coming from the corporate America background of a Fortune 100 company that Trump visited to, that the day after he visited to, which is the steel industry, I'll just say it, U.S. Steel in Granite City, the day after we had environmental release. And let me tell you, the Secret Service was all over that place afterwards. I don't agree that they think it's safe. I know firsthand these environmental measures that they take to measure the environmental toxins, and they can pick and choose data sampling points in order to get the data that they want, because any expert that understands what the chemical is, guess what? They also understand where to take the samples from to ensure that they get the results that they want. And guess what? That's what we found out before people like Nick and everybody else got the data that they did with the videos that they got to show that, hey, guess what? Norfolk Southern.
Well, that would be an astonishing conspiracy that they would be able to do that in these circumstances.
So was the vaccine.
And again,
So was the
astonishing.
vaccine effects. I mean, these same government entities told us the vaccines were safe. Remember?
Okay, but
now we trust them.
The skepticism has to be based on some information out there. There's
Right,
nothing
absolutely.
unusual about the testing here. It's certainly consistent to what we know about the chemicals. I mean, the skepticism can't.
I'm an emergency management specialist with a master's degree in this and a certified hazmat tech and help do all this. I agree with you on most points. I disagree with you on this point.
Okay, so tell me
who's
who's coordinating all of this fake testing? Who's running it?
Norfolk
I don't think
Southern.
that's what he's saying. I think he's
Norfolk
saying
Southern is running
Guys. Okay.
So is Norfolk running the police, the fire chief, the state agencies, and the feds all through that one corporation? Is that how it's working?
Wait, you think the police are certified to go out and test water for
the point is,
potability?
you've got separate entities doing the testing, and I'm not hearing anything persuasive that there's a conspiracy to rig the tests. And you're talking to someone who believes everything. You've got to put out something there other than just general skepticism, which is fine, but it's got to have some reality behind it.
The EPA and the National Response Center, whenever a private company has a release, the EPA relies on the private company with their initial
Nick, did you mute everyone?
Nope,
Nick, we
my
can't
mute
hear you.
button. Nope, my mute button didn't work.
Cool. I know you're trying to wrap up anyway, Nick. So maybe whoever muted.
I'm trying to message you in the background. I don't know
yeah.
if you're seeing anything, but
Yeah. Oh, my mute button doesn't work. Well, it just worked. I just muted everyone. I think Nick's trying to wrap up everyone. We went a bit over time. Nick, applaud what you've done in Ohio. Keep updating us. For everyone else that came in, for the team in the background that organized this incredible panel. Well done, guys. It was a great discussion. Thank you. And we'll see you all tomorrow for the AI break. And Nick, you got to go back home, man. Enough expectation. Bro, come on. Look, I'll take you to Ukraine if you go back home this week.
all right. That sounds like a pretty good deal. We'll have to discuss that one then.
Thanks, we're wrapping up the space. We're not talking about Ukraine.
This is super quick. So in terms of the narrative of $500 million, it's not $500 million.
Schizo, what is
$500 million. That's like a whole discussion.
I love
this.
I know. I was like, just before you wrap up, let me talk about the Ukraine war for 2 hours, please, man. So anyway, Schizo, love you. Appreciate you coming up on stage, and everyone else. Thank you so much. Nick, I'm gonna wrap up the space on your behalf. Take care, everyone. Thank you.